Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Nightfall Terrors. I know many of you enjoy using these videos to help you fall asleep, so before you start to drift off, it would be great if you could leave a comment sharing where you're listening from around the world. If you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Now, let's get cozy, settle in, and begin. I grew up in a home where affection wasn't shared equally. My childhood was a storm of early responsibilities and heavy silences. There were 4 of us siblings, and my older sister Barbara naturally stepped into the role of caregiver whenever our real mother was absent. Life demanded we mature far too quickly. When our youngest sibling was born, and our mother was hospitalized due to complications after childbirth, everything shifted. My father, working long hours, left the household responsibilities to Barbara and me. I still recall those days, gray and weary, as if our home had been swallowed by an invisible fog of sorrow and fatigue. But nothing could have prepared us for Hugo, our 3rd sibling. He was 9 then, and something about him had always felt different. Even from his earliest steps, there was a strange emptiness in his eyes, an absence of the spark most children have. What initially seemed like detachment soon revealed itself as something more disturbing. I can't pinpoint when it began, but there were warning signs. Subtle at first, broken toys no one admitted to damaging, neighborhood animals that vanished without explanation, and Hugo's unsettling satisfaction when others suffered. Barbara and I tried to maintain order, but Hugo brought chaos with him. It felt like he thrived on testing us, fully aware that we were too drained to fight back. One night, not long after our baby brother arrived, the rain was relentless. The sound of the storm consumed the house as Barbara and I tried to sleep. Hugo, as usual, was wandering the halls. A strange unease pulled me from bed. Something in the air felt off. I went searching for Barbara and found her in the kitchen, shaking. On the table was one of the large kitchen knives, and Hugo stood before her, wearing a smile that no child should have. His eyes were vacant, yet filled with something chilling. Barbara managed to take the knife away, but that night, everything changed. We could no longer tell ourselves Hugo was just acting out. He was something else entirely, something dangerous. The weeks that followed were a struggle. We didn't tell our father. He was too consumed with our mother's health and the baby, and even if we had, how could we explain it? How could we make someone believe that a 9-year-old could harbor such cruelty? So we stayed quiet and did what we could, convincing ourselves it might pass. But it didn't. Hugo seemed to feed on our fear. One afternoon, during another storm, Barbara and I were with the baby in the living room. The rain battered the windows with thunder rolling in the distance. Suddenly, Hugo appeared. His face was blank, and in his hands was a jar of murky liquid. Before we could react, he threw it onto the table. It was acid, taken from our father's tools. The table was ruined, but more importantly, the message was clear. Hugo had no boundaries. After that, Barbara and I began rotating shifts. One of us always had to stay awake while the other rested. The fatigue was unbearable. The house, already heavy with grief from our mother's absence, became something darker. Every shadow seemed dangerous. Every corner, a place to fear. Even the sound of rain, once calming, became a warning. There's one night that has never left me. The rain was coming down harder than ever, and the baby stop crying. Barbara was trying to soothe him while I went to check the windows. That's when I heard a sound from the baby's room. My heart froze. I rushed in and found Hugo standing beside the crib, holding a pillow. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I felt real terror, as though I was looking at something inhuman. He said nothing. He just let the pillow drop and walked away, like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the baby's door, gripping a stick, shaking every time thunder echoed through the house. I knew we couldn't go on like this, but what could we do? How do you protect your family from someone who is also family? How do you admit that a child can be dangerous? When our mother finally returned, things calmed on the surface. Hugo behaved himself around her, but Barbara, and I knew better. He hadn't changed. He was simply waiting. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me from across the room, his smile cold, sending chills down my spine. Years later, when we finally moved away from that house and distanced ourselves from Hugo, I started to feel some of the tension leave my body. But the fear never fully disappeared. Hugo grew up to be a ruthless man, that much I know. Though he left our lives long ago, stories still find their way to me, whispers in conversations or in news articles that never name him, but describe acts so cold and calculated that I know they're his. He has done things I couldn't imagine, not even in my worst dreams. Hugo was a storm that never truly passed, a darkness that couldn't be contained. And while he's no longer with us, his presence still lingers. Sometimes, I think that darkness wasn't taught or triggered. It was part of him from the very beginning. To this day, when I hear the rain tapping against the windows, I'm pulled back into those halls, back to that child I was, scared, helpless, because even if Hugo is gone, his legacy remains a permanent part of me. Rain once comforted me. Its steady rhythm on the roof used to wrap around me like a soft blanket. Despite everything, it brought me peace. Perhaps that's why, as a teenager living in a remote house in the countryside, I welcomed the storms. But now, many years later, that same sound triggers something darker in me. It brings back memories of the night everything changed. We lived on a secluded plot of land surrounded by hills and dense woods. It was a quiet place, perhaps too quiet. Our nearest neighbors were the Martinez family, about 200 meters away across a wheat field that always moved with the breeze. They were a modest family. Mauricio, the quiet and burly father, Clara, his kind but sad-eyed wife, and their two children, Sophia, who was 9, and little Diego, who was 4 and had Down syndrome. Diego was unique, always smiling, but with a distant, thoughtful gaze. I often saw him playing in their backyard while I worked outside. His laughter brightened the otherwise lonely afternoons. I can't say I knew the Martinez family well, but they seemed ordinary. I never imagined anything sinister behind their doors. It began on another stormy night. The sky had darkened completely, and rain poured down so heavily that even the trees seemed to bow under its weight. I was in my room, reading, when I heard something strange through the window. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but then I realized it was screaming. Sharp, desperate, someone calling for help. I turned off the lamp and looked out through the soaked curtains. I saw lights on at the Martinez home. Something was wrong. Clara was moving frantically outside, while Mauricio stood motionless at the door. Sophia was nowhere in sight, and more troubling, Diego was missing. That is, night, the storm and silence mixed in a way that unsettled me to the core. The next morning, the town was buzzing. Diego had vanished. Clara said he woke up in the night and, as he sometimes did, wandered off. But this time, he didn't return. The police arrived, and search efforts began immediately. They combed the fields and woods, but no trace was found. People were stunned. How could a small child disappear without leaving a sign? As time passed, whispers began. Some noted Mauricio's strange detachment, how he didn't appear as shaken as one might expect. Others recalled seeing bruises on Diego weeks earlier, but no one had dared to ask questions. Then, one afternoon, the police returned, not to search, but to question Mauricio. Suspicion had turned toward him. What they uncovered shocked everyone. That night, Diego had awoken disoriented and crying. His father, irritated and angry, confronted him. Witnesses said the boy's cries rang through the house as Mauricio, overwhelmed, lashed out repeatedly. When Diego stopped moving, his small body lifeless, the house fell into a terrifying stillness. Trying to hide what he had done, Mauricio wrapped Diego in a blanket. Then, as the storm reached its peak, he carried the boy into the forest. No one knows for certain what he did, but days later, under a fallen tree, police discovered a small, freshly dug mound. There lay Diego. The town was devastated. At first, people wanted to believe Clara was just another victim, but the truth was more unsettling. During the trial, it was revealed that Clara had witnessed everything. She heard Diego's cries and saw her husband carry his body away. Yet, she stayed silent. She claimed fear for Sophia, fear for herself. She didn't call the police. She did nothing. But through her silence, she became complicit. Clara was arrested alongside Mauricio, and though her sentence was shorter, it separated her from Sophia, who was placed in the care of distant relatives. I remember the last time I saw Clara. It was a dull, gray afternoon, and from my window I watched her being taken away in a police car. She didn't look back. Her face remained calm, almost expressionless, as if she had already resigned herself to what was coming. But in her eyes, there was a deep emptiness, the kind that comes from choices no one should ever have to make, and from a guilt that doesn't fade. Over time, the Martinez house was left to decay, and nature slowly reclaimed it. The walls that once held laughter and secrets were now covered in moss. The windows shattered, and tree branches cast shadows over what remained of the roof. The visible signs of what happened there faded with the years, but the whispers never stopped. For many, the house became just another forgotten ruin, a quiet reminder of tragedy. But for me, it still stands as vividly as it did the day everything changed. Even now, I can close my eyes and see Diego running through the yard, his laughter carried by the wind across the field. I can picture Clara in the kitchen, watching him through the window with a distant look, while Sophia played nearby. But those once warm memories are forever shadowed by that night. No storm, no matter how loud, can drown out what happened. Each raindrop tapping the roof during a storm brings it all back. I still hear Diego's cries no one came to soothe, and alongside them, I hear Clara's silence, not the kind that comes from shock, but the kind that fills the space where action and empathy should have been. That silence lingers more deeply than any scream. It's the absence of what should have been done. Sometimes I wonder if the house, now hidden beneath layers of vines and broken glass, still holds on to those secrets the way I do. If among the branches that press against shattered panes, there's still a presence of what the family once was. On the surface, ordinary, but broken underneath. And I wonder if those who pass by feel what I feel. A chill, not from the cold, but from something else entirely. Something you can't see, but you know is there. It doesn't matter how much time passes or how many storms come and go. Diego's voice and Clara's silence stay with me. They've become a part of me, like old scars that never truly heal. Some memories time can't erase, and on nights when the rain comes heavy, it's not just water hitting the ground. It's a reminder. Rain has always followed me, like a quiet observer to the hardest moments of my life. I don't hate it. In fact, when I was younger, I loved it. I used to run through it with my younger brother, David. But now, each raindrop brings me back to a storm I've never been able to escape. David was only 16 when he died. Still, it often felt like he carried more emotional weight than most adults I've known. He had a big heart, always trying to make people laugh, even when he was hurting. But everything shifted when our parents divorced. I was 23, living and working in another city, while David was still figuring out who he was. The divorce hit him hard, like a wave pulling him into a darkness he couldn't get out of. At first, I tried to help. I came home on weekends, took him to play soccer or go for drives in my old car. I listened, even though he rarely said much beyond, "I'm fine," wearing a smile that I knew wasn't real. But each time I left, I worried more. He was stuck at home with two parents who barely spoke, and a growing loneliness that seemed to take over his room. Then came the habits. It started off small, some beers with friends, a few cigarettes, nothing unusual. But soon, it escalated. He began using substances I didn't even know were available in our neighborhood. Each time I visited, he looked thinner and more withdrawn. His room no longer had the clutter of games and clothes. It smelled strange, like sweat, smoke, and chemicals I couldn't place. One night I came home without warning. The rain was falling hard, and something told me I needed to see him. I thought maybe the surprise would lift his spirits. The house was quiet. My mom was asleep after a long hospital shift. My father had moved out long ago, and his absence was still heavy in the air. As I walked past David's door, I heard soft music coming from inside. I almost went in, but decided to change first since I was soaked. It was a small decision, one of those moments you don't think about until later, when it becomes the one thing you wish you could change. The storm raged on, and I lay on my bed for a few minutes listening to the rain, feeling oddly calm, until something felt wrong. Maybe it was the silence under the music or a sudden gut feeling. I got up and knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. My chest tightened. I turned to the knob and opened the door. The scene is burned into my memory. David was on the floor, his face pale and lifeless under the soft light from his desk lamp. Next to him were an empty syringe and an open bottle of pills. I froze. Then I dropped to the ground and shook him. hoping it wasn't too late, but his body was cold, already beyond reach. The storm outside grew louder, thunder shaking the windows, rain hitting harder than ever, like even the sky was grieving. I called for help, screamed his name, dialed emergency services, but I knew, deep down, there was nothing more I could do. The paramedics arrived quickly, but their silence said everything. My mother came out of her room, and her cries echoed through the house, mixing with the storm. The rest of the night is a blur, just fragments of memory, as if my mind shut down to protect me. For weeks, I couldn't step into his room. It felt like time had frozen there. When I finally did, I found traces of his pain, a notebook filled with dark sketches, old photos from happier days, and a half-finished note I still don't fully understand. I often wonder if I could have done more. If I'd gone into his room instead of changing first, maybe I could have saved him. But the truth is, David had been battling something invisible, something that consumed him, while the rest of us failed to see it. Now, when it rains, I go back to that moment. The sound of raindrops on the roof brings me to the scene in his room, and each rumble of thunder echoes my mother's cries. No matter how much time passes, the rain will always return me to that night, a night that never really ended. David is gone, but his absence lingers heavier than his presence ever did, and as long as I live, I'll carry the weight of guilt, unanswered questions, and the memory of a storm that changed everything. I've never liked the rain, not because of the cold or getting wet, but because of what it brings back. Every drop seems to carry a piece of the past, a memory I've tried to bury, but can't. I live alone now in a small apartment in a city where no one knows my name. No questions, no past. That's what I need. But some nights, like this one, when the rain hammers the windows, the memories return. No matter how much I try to live like that chapter never happened, I can't deny the truth. I was part of something I wish I could forget. Something that left a gap in me that will never fully close. It all began 10 years ago, during a time when I was lost. I had just lost my job, my relationship had ended, and my family felt far away. That's when I met him. I never knew if Samuel was his real name, but that's what everyone called him. He had a way about him, sharp eyes, a calm voice, and a presence that drew people in. He could make you believe anything just by speaking. At first, it seemed harmless. Samuel led a small group that met in a remote mountain cabin to talk about life's meaning. I was invited to one of their meetings, and in my search for something to hold on to, I went. That's where I met others, people just as lost as I was. Young adults who'd run away, single mothers, retirees with nowhere to turn. We all shared a longing for something more. Samuel talked about a path, a spiritual journey that promised to take us beyond life's suffering. He made us feel chosen, as if we were the only ones capable of understanding this hidden truth. The meetings grew longer, eventually turning into retreats. The cabin became home. I quit my job, cut ties with the outside world. It didn't feel like giving something up. It felt like freedom. Under Samuel's guidance, I believed I had found a new family, a group that accepted me fully. But things slowly shifted. Samuel became more demanding, more authoritative. What started as suggestions for living a better life soon became strict rules. He dictated our meals, our sleep, even our thoughts. At first, no one questioned it. After all, he was our guide, our supposed savior. But gradually I sensed something wasn't right. One night during a ritual at the cabin, Samuel spoke of the end. He said the world was heading toward destruction, and that only we, the chosen ones, could escape the pain. To do this, he claimed, we had to prepare ourselves to move beyond this life, to leave our bodies and reach a higher plane. At the time, I believed he meant a kind of spiritual awakening, an internal shift. Later, I understood his meaning was much darker. Can't explain what opened my eyes. Maybe it was the unusual tone in Samuel's voice, or the strange looks from the others, like they knew something I didn't. Whatever it was, I made the choice to leave soon after. It wasn't easy. When I told Samuel I wanted out, his demeanor changed entirely. His warmth vanished, replaced by something cold and menacing. Still, I managed to walk away with nothing but the clothes on my back. The first few months back in New Orleans, the city, were hard. I felt lost again, like life outside the group had no meaning. But slowly, I began rebuilding myself. That time in the mountains became a memory I hoped to forget. Until one rainy night, everything changed. The news came on. Mass suicide in mountain cabin. A chill ran through me. The screen showed footage of the cabin, now swarming with police and medics. Dozens of bodies had been found, everyone dressed in the same white robes we wore. They had ingested poison prepared by Samuel, who was also among the dead. They had followed him to the very end. I sat frozen, unable to absorb what I was seeing. I thought about the people I had shared that space with, their faces, their laughter, the nights by the fire. They were gone, victims of a man we had trusted completely, and I could have been one of them. Since then, the rain has never sounded the same. When I hear it, I can't help but imagine that final night in the cabin, the water hitting the roof as they took the poison one by one. I wonder what they felt in those final moments. Were they afraid? Did they hesitate? Or were they convinced, as we once were, that they were doing the right thing? Some nights, I dream of the cabin. In the dream, I'm there, but I can't speak or move. I watch them drink, see their bodies fall, while Samuel looks directly at me, as if he knows I'm there, helpless. Then I wake up to the sound of rain and the lingering memory of what might have been. I know this will always be part of me, a hidden scar I carry. No matter how much time passes, or how many times I remind myself that leaving was the right decision, the past remains. There's always something, a moment, a sound that takes me back, a reminder that I was part of something far darker than I ever imagined. I ask myself often, can I forgive myself? How do you live with the knowledge that you share trust, hope, and belief with someone like Samuel? I try to convince myself I wasn't like him, that I didn't enable what happened. But in the quiet, when the rain pounds the windows and the memories return, I can't ignore the truth. I believed in him. I followed him. And with every step toward that cabin, I inched closer to his delusion. Silence has become my refuge and my burden. I wonder if that same silence settled in the cabin after the last of them drank. A heavy, suffocating stillness filled with questions and grief. It's in that silence that I confront my past, the part of me I can't bury. I want to believe they found peace, but deep down, I know peace escapes those of us left behind. Their deaths weigh on me, an invisible chain I can't undo. Even as I tried to build a life far from that place, I remain connected, tied to the memory, the people, the night. It all ended. Some things can't be undone. Some stories leave marks too deep to fade. As long as the rain falls, carrying whispers of what happened, I'll keep facing them. The ghosts I helped create. I don't know if redemption is possible, but I keep walking under this gray sky, carrying the sound of the rain, and a memory I'll never be free from. Music. I've always believed some truths are best left hidden, buried like bones in the earth. But life has a way of unearthing them when you least expect. For me, it happened on a gray afternoon, during a storm that felt like it wanted to wash everything away. I was 17, living in a small town where rain was constant, and so were the whispers. I never imagined that storm would mark the beginning of my descent into something I still haven't escaped. My childhood, at least on the surface, seemed normal. I lived with my mother, a quiet woman who worked long hours at a local shop, and my uncle Ernesto, quiet, distant, always nearby. I never knew my father. Whenever I asked, my mother would brush it off, saying some people simply weren't meant to be parents. I accepted that, but a part of me always felt a gap. That day, the storm rolled in early. Dark clouds gathered like they were preparing for something grim, and the wind howled with unusual force. I stayed inside, watching the rain beat against the windows. When I found the box, it was hidden in the attic, a place I rarely visited. I wasn't searching for anything, just passing time as the storm raged. The box was old, wooden, and carved with initials. I should have ignored it, but something about it drew me in. I opened it carefully, sensing that I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Inside were photos, letters, and documents belonging to my mother and Ernesto. They looked young in the pictures, close, too close. But what truly shocked me was a handwritten letter signed by my mother. At first, the words didn't make sense. My brain resisted them. But as I read, the truth became clearer. Ernesto wasn't just my uncle. He was my father, and my mother wasn't just my mother. She was also his sister. I couldn't breathe. Everything I'd believed, the story of my life, was shattered in an instant. I sat on the attic floor, the letter trembling in my hands, the storm outside echoing my confusion. I didn't want to believe it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the words came back. I started to recall things I hadn't noticed before. The strange glances, the awkward silence when anyone asked about my father, the way Ernesto hovered close, but never too close. It all started to make sense, and at the same time, made none at all. In the days that followed, I tried to act normal, but inside, I was collapsing. Ernesto's presence felt unbearable. Every time I saw him, I felt sick. My mother seemed unaware, or maybe unwilling to see how I was breaking. I needed answers. I began searching the house, every drawer, every old box, every hidden corner. And what I found only made it worse. There were more letters, exchanges between my mother and Ernesto, recounting their isolated upbringing, their confusion, their guilt. They had chosen to keep me and their secret hidden from the world. The idea that I was the product of something so twisted filled me with anger and shame. I began shutting out the world, locking myself in my room, drowning in the never-ending sound of rain. My bond with my mother deteriorated, though I never confronted her. My silence grew colder. With Ernesto, it was even worse. I couldn't even look at him. Then, one stormy night, the pressure inside me snapped. Thunder cracked, lightning flashed, and I found myself in the attic, once more, searching again for something, anything, to help me understand. There, among the shadows and noise of the storm, I found something else. A diary, my mother's. Its pages were filled with things never meant to be read. She wrote about her bond with Ernesto, how she tried to break free. She always ended up going back, no matter how much she tried to distance herself. In her diary, she confessed that despite knowing the consequences, she chose to keep me. As I read, a wave of emotions overwhelmed me. Sadness, anger, betrayal, and most hauntingly, fear. Fear of what the truth meant for me, and for the life ahead. I closed the diary and left the attic behind. That night, as the storm raged outside, I understood that my life had permanently changed. The truth had reshaped me in ways I couldn't undo. And even though I've tried to start fresh, far from that town, every rainfall brings it all back. Each raindrop, each thunderclap, carries the echo of that secret, one that marked me for life. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my mother, or Ernesto, or even myself, for being born into this situation. What I do know is that the storm never really ends, and for as long as I live, I'll carry the burden of a truth I never chose to uncover. I had always sensed something was off between my Uncle Ramon and his wife, Patricia. The way she avoided eye contact or slightly tilted her head when he spoke. It was as though she was carefully choosing every move, trying not to set him off. Ramon lived just a few houses down. We weren't especially close, but he was a constant presence in my life, familiar, if distant. Then, one day, he vanished. It began on a night thick with rain and wind, the kind that shakes windows and pulls at trees. I was in my room when I overheard my mother say, "I haven't seen Ramon in days," her voice tinged with worry. His disappearance quickly became the neighborhood's main topic. Some assumed he had simply left Patricia, walking away from a dull life. Others speculated more sinister theories, though no one had real answers. Patricia remained composed, claiming he had left after an argument and hadn't returned. Her calmness made her story sound believable, but something didn't sit right. Every time I passed her house, an unease crept over me. It wasn't just his absence. It was the silence that followed, a silence that felt unnatural. Over time, people stopped asking questions. They accepted that Ramon was gone, but I couldn't. Something felt unresolved. Weeks later, during another storm, pieces of the puzzle began to appear. I was home alone, watching rain fill the streets, when I saw Patricia in her yard. Despite the heavy downpour, she moved quickly, carrying something wrapped in a tarp. Even in the dark, I could tell she was digging. The urgency in her movements chilled me. She buried what she had carried, covered it, and returned inside as if nothing had happened. The next day, heart pounding, I approached the spot while she was out. The ground was unsettled, and to my horror, I saw small bones protruding from the soil. My mind raced. Were they Ramon's? Could Could Patricia have done this? The idea was horrifying, yet the evidence was there. I went home in shock, unable to fully grasp what I'd seen. For days I avoided Patricia, disturbed by how normal she acted. But then, it all came to light. A neighbor, also suspicious, alerted the police. They arrived a week later and made a horrifying discovery. Ramon hadn't just been killed, he had been dismembered. Patricia had cooked and eaten part of his body. The rest was either buried or discreetly discarded. During interrogation, she revealed Ramon had abused her for years. Isolated and trapped in a cycle of violence, she had acted out of desperation. As the truth came out, more neighbors remembered the muffled arguments and sudden silences. It all added up, but the reality was difficult to accept. The street I grew up on changed that day. Ramon and Patricia's house was boarded up, a monument to everything we didn't see, or chose not to. The yard, once just another patch of grass, now seemed to conceal more than just bones. People avoided that house. Conversations became colder. We were no longer a community. We were strangers pretending not to see what we all knew. Whenever someone mentioned their names, a heavy silence followed, as though something unseen had entered the room. Even now, when the rain falls hard, I recall Patricia standing in the storm, her hands digging frantically. Her face held despair, and something else, something darker. It looked like guilt, maybe even resolve. Every shovelful felt like an attempt to hide the truth under the soil. And though I try not to dwell on it, one question lingers. What if no one had acted? Would someone else have disappeared? Every time I pass that abandoned house, I wonder, are there more secrets buried there? Sometimes I catch myself watching people differently, looking for signs, listening to the quiet between their words. It's as if the rain whispers, reminders that secrets don't stay hidden forever. It may wash away footprints, but it never truly erases them. The past always finds a way to return. Fate plays tricks on us sometimes. Just when we think we've moved on, the past resurfaces. It all began with a breakup. Nothing extraordinary, just the quiet end of something once meaningful. Irene and I met a few years ago. Early on, everything felt right. We shared stories, long nights of conversation, laughter during simple meals. We believed we were building something real. But time revealed the cracks. Arguments grew, misunderstandings piled up, and the affection between us began to fade. We looked at each other and saw not love, but distance. We tried to fix it, but the energy was gone. Eventually, we accepted it was over, not in anger, but with reluctant understanding. Irene moved out just a few blocks away. At first, I felt a sense of relief, space to think, to recover. I stayed busy, hoping the routine would ease the emptiness. I thought we'd both move on. But then, the messages started. At first, I thought they were part of closure, shared thoughts to make sense of the end. But the tone changed quickly. I miss you. I need to see you. Please don't leave me alone. The messages became more intense, frequent, anxious, then threatening. You'll regret leaving me. I won't let you go so easily. Fear crept in. I didn't want to believe she was losing control. I hoped she'd move on too. But her messages kept coming, desperate, angry, obsessive. I stopped responding, hoping that would help. It didn't. Then I met Valeria. It happened by chance. On a rainy afternoon in a cafe, she smiled, offered casual conversation, and somehow lifted the weight I had been carrying. She was different, genuine, warm, easy to talk to. Our connection felt natural, effortless. Within just a few days, we began seeing each other more frequently. Her messages were light, filled with curiosity about who I was. Everything with Valeria felt natural. She made me feel like I could finally breathe, as though I was being offered a fresh start. Everything about Valeria was different. Her kindness, her laughter, the way she genuinely listened. Each piece fit together in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Her presence calmed me, silencing the constant tension caused by Irene's endless messages. My emotions were still tangled and confusing, but I started to believe life was giving me another chance. That happiness might be possible again. Valeria made me think there was still sunshine after a storm, that even the darkest times eventually give way to light, but the past, as it often does, wasn't ready to release me. It was a Sunday, a rainy, stormy afternoon. Wind slammed against the windows, and the steady rhythm of the rain made everything feel more surreal, more tense. Valeria and I were at home, enjoying a quiet moment together. We laughed, chatted, and appreciated the calm that had settled between us. We had prepared a meal and planned to watch a movie. Everything felt normal, everything felt right, but something shifted. An uneasy feeling crept in, a chill that ran down my spine without explanation. I heard a strange noise, like someone knocking. At first, I assumed it was just the wind, but then it came again, louder, sharper. This wasn't something nature could have caused. I got up to check. Before I reached the door, the knocking stopped. I stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do. My heart raced. Something felt off. Suddenly, the door creaked open with force. I turned instinctively, but before I could act, I saw her. Irene. Her face was pale, her eyes red, part crying, part furious, and in her hands, a gun. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't understand what was happening or why she was there. I stood, frozen, unable to process the reality in front of me. Valeria stepped back, stunned. I tried to shield her, to stand between them, but everything happened too fast. Gunshots rang out. The sound was overwhelming. The force of the impact knocked me backward. Pain tore through my chest and head. Valeria screamed. In her eyes I saw fear, disbelief, and devastation. I tried to move, to reach her, but it was too late. In a single instant, everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital. Cold light filled the room, blinding me. I was lying on a bed, surrounded by machines and beeping monitors. My head spun, and pain pulsed through my body. For a few minutes, I couldn't remember what had happened. But when it hit me, horror followed. Valeria was gone. The police told me she had arrived in critical condition, but hadn't survived. The grief was crushing. I struggled to breathe. The image of Irene with that weapon haunted me, playing again and again in my mind. She had forced her way back into my life and taken away what was just beginning to matter again. The police found her quickly. She didn't resist arrest. She turned herself in, almost as if she'd planned it. She said she did it because she couldn't handle losing me, that she didn't understand why I had chosen Valeria. She believed that if I saw her again, if I looked her in the eye, I would return to her, that we could go back to how things were. But love isn't a guarantee. It's not something anyone can demand. Love means freedom and respect. Irene never saw that. What she called love had become obsession, and that obsession consumed her. The following weeks were torment. I couldn't escape the memories of that day. The sudden door, the noise, the pain. They chased me. Even the rain, once a source of comfort, became a cruel reminder of everything I had lost, of everything I had failed to protect. It felt like the storms followed me, like nature itself. You wanted to ensure I never forgot. On stormy nights when the wind howls and shadows grow longer, I close my eyes and wonder, how could I not see what Irene had become? Why couldn't I protect Valeria? And why does the rain in my memory never stop? There are no answers. Perhaps there never will be. All that remains is the rain, unrelenting, tapping on the windows of my soul, reminding me that time doesn't heal every wound. It doesn't erase the pain we cause or the pain we carry. Life continues, but something inside me broke that day, and though I tried to move forward, Irene's shadow follows me. Every time it rains, every time I close my eyes. My grandfather rarely spoke of his past. He was the kind of man who locked his memories away, perhaps fearing that speaking them aloud would bring them back too vividly. Silence was his way of coping, his shield against the ghosts that followed him. But sometimes, especially during the heaviest storms, he would speak. It was as though the rain had the power to open a door inside him. The wind rattling the windows, the distant thunder. It seemed to unlock parts of his history he could no longer keep hidden. He never spoke directly. His stories weren't like other grandfathers. No cheerful tales or clear morals. He spoke softly, almost in a whisper, as though each word cost him something. Yet he needed to release them, to lift the burden he'd carried for decades. Would sit nearby, listening closely, never interrupting. I knew that if I asked questions, the moment would pass, and I might never hear those words again. It was during those storms that he spoke of his youth, of the war that tore Europe apart and dragged the world into darkness. He told me how he ended up in a place where human dignity vanished. He was only 18 when he was captured. Life had been simple, peaceful. He thought war was something distant, but fate doesn't ask permission. It comes like a storm. The morning he was arrested, something in the air told him life was about to change. The train to the concentration camp was overcrowded, bodies packed tight, hope slipping away. No one knew exactly what awaited, but all sensed the horror that loomed. People didn't even look at one another, as if seeing into another's eyes would reveal the terror ahead. The journey felt endless. The cold seeped into their bones. Hope was smothered by fear. When they finally arrived, no one had the strength to resist. They were taken to a camp, its name forever buried by my grandfather, though its memory never left him. It was a place of shadows, where identity no longer mattered, only survival. At first, the prisoners didn't fully understand, but the harsh reality set in quickly. Hunger, cold, and constant surveillance ruled their lives. Food was nearly inedible, dirty, meager scraps, and only to dull the pain of hunger, never to nourish. He told me he often wondered if part of him started dying the moment he walked through the gates. But fear didn't just live in the cold or in empty stomachs. The deeper fear was in what people became, how their eyes emptied, their spirits dimmed, how survival took priority over dignity. He watched friends turn against each other for crumbs. He watched people become ghosts of who they once were, and the worst part was recognizing those changes in himself. The guards didn't just watch. They seemed to sense weakness, crushing any flicker of hope before it could take root. The most haunting moment, he said, was the failed escape. A small group tried to flee. Desperate, they believed there had to be something better beyond the walls. They were caught, dragged back, executed publicly. The shots rang out, cutting through the camp, and through my grandfather's soul. He realized then, escaping wasn't bravery. It was a kind of curse. And so he survived, not because he was strong, but because he had made a promise to his mother, a promise to stay alive. When the war ended and he was freed, he wasn't the same. The real scars weren't visible. They lived inside him. He used to say the worst storms aren't those outside, but the ones that rage within us. I never believed in signs. Until that night, the rain was heavier than usual. The wind howled against the windows as if trying to erase everything in its path. The thunder echoed endlessly. Streetlights flickered. The roads ran like rivers. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, one where every house looked like the next, where neighbors smiled and waved. No one expected darkness to grow in such a place. No one, except me. I was just another face in the crowd, nothing special. My routine was simple: work, some exercise, lonely dinners, and then the quiet of my home. But ever since I moved to that street, something bothered me. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it stayed on my mind. My neighbor, Richard. To be honest, I can't say he was a bad person. On the contrary, he seemed like the ideal example of kindness, friendliness, and generosity. In fact, the first few times I met him, I thought he was an interesting person. He was older than me, maybe about 20 years older, but he always had a smile on his face and a voice so soft it could calm anyone down. At first, I didn't think much of it. Richard was just a nice man, like any other neighbor. But there was something about his behavior that began to puzzle me. I often saw him outside his house, walking around his garden or chatting with other neighbors, but he never seemed to have any close relationships. He kept to himself, as if he participated in the community out of courtesy, but didn't really belong. He didn't talk much about his personal life, and although he was friendly, he showed no interest in having deeper conversations. He stayed in his own bubble. What truly made me suspicious, though, was one rainy night, like this one. The storm had reached its peak, the wind howling, and the streets flooding quickly. My watch read 11:30 when I heard a strange noise coming from Richard's house. At first, I thought it was just rain hitting the roof or something falling due to the wind. But when I looked out my living room window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the middle of the torrential rain, a dark figure was moving around Richard's yard. It wasn't him. The figure moved with unnerving speed and agility, and it didn't look human. My pulse raced, and without thinking, I grabbed my keys and stepped out onto the porch to get a better look. The streetlights flickered, threatening to go out, leaving everything in almost total darkness. I watched as the figure disappeared behind the house with a terrifying precision. My instincts urged me to get closer, and even though my body wanted to retreat, I found myself walking toward the back door of Richard's house. My heart was pounding. I knew what I was doing was reckless, but curiosity pushed me forward. As I approached, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. The back door of the house was slightly ajar, and a faint light shone inside. I could hear muffled noises like something heavy being moved. Just as I was about to take another step, a familiar sound froze me. Footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. Only the rain and wind battering against the walls of the house. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things, that the storm was playing tricks on me. But then, the light in Richard's house flickered, and I saw a tall, thin figure slowly moving toward the back door. My heart raced. It was Richard, but something about his demeanor, the way he walked, made me hesitate. His movements were too smooth, too controlled. He wasn't the friendly neighbor I used to exchange greetings with. Something was off. I stood there paralyzed, watching Richard stop in front of the door and disappear inside the house. What happened next changed everything. Shortly after, a figure emerged from the house. This time, it wasn't Richard. The person's face was hard to make out, but they moved quickly, as if running away. My mind was in a state of panic, trying to process what I had seen. I couldn't shake the thought that something dark was happening in that house, something far beyond my understanding. I decided to leave. My legs were shaking, my hands sweaty. I didn't know what I had just witnessed, but I felt the need to investigate. I rushed back to my house, but that night, I couldn't sleep. The images of what I saw kept replaying in my mind, and the sound of the rain seemed to amplify every thought. The next day, the calm had returned to the city, but something had changed within me. Every time I looked at Richard's house, I felt a pressure in my chest, as if the air had thickened. For days, I watched from my window, hoping to see something that would confirm my suspicions, something that could give me answers. But everything remained silent until one afternoon, when the streetlights began to flicker again. I saw something that made me shudder. Richard was leaving his house, carrying something large in his hands, a bag big enough to hide something inside. My stomach churned, and I immediately grabbed my phone, intending to call the police. But before I could do anything, the lights went out. The phone slipped from my hands. What happened next was even stranger. As the night wore on, the rain grew heavier, and the shadows in the streets seemed to stretch longer. When I looked out the window, I saw Richard. This time, he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a thin figure I had never seen before. They seemed to be talking, but in an instant, the figure disappeared around the corner. Richard stood motionless for several minutes before returning to his house. That was the last time I saw Richard. Days later, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Apparently someone had disappeared, though no one knew who. The police had begun investigating. Several years have passed since then, and I still think about that night. No one ever mentioned Richard again. No one has figured out what happened in that house. As for me, I've never been able to forget what I saw. There were no ghosts or monsters, just a man, a friendly neighbor hiding behind a facade that, in the end, became his doom. The rain sometimes seems to wash away those memories, but what I witnessed, what I heard, is so deeply engraved in my mind that I often wonder if one day someone will dare to uncover the truth behind his facade. On rainy nights, I always hear something in the distance, something that makes me look back at the window, and even though I've never confirmed it, I always feel that in some dark corner, Richard is still watching. My childhood was far from normal. From an early age, I knew only the constant upheaval of new homes, new faces, and new rules. Life in foster homes was always the same, a series of friendly faces that didn't last long. My memories were blurry at first, like fragments of a movie I couldn't quite understand. What I do clearly remember is the feeling of abandonment, like I never fit in. The last foster home I stayed in before becoming an adult was the worst. It was an old wooden house on the outskirts of town, isolated and far removed from everything. In retrospect, the place was built with a welcoming smile, but all it offered was shadows and cold. I remember when I arrived, the rain was pouring down, the sky dark with clouds and the wind howling through the trees, as if the world were about to collapse. The house seemed so lonely, so isolated, that even the sound of the storm seemed muffled by its walls. At first I thought it might be different, that maybe this family would be different. The woman who welcomed me, Susanna, was kind and warm. She always offered me a cup of tea or invited me to sit by the fireplace. Her husband, Luis, didn't say much. He just stood quietly in the corner of the living room, disconnected from everything. The strange thing was, I rarely saw Susanna and Luis together. Susanna would often retire to her room, and Luis would spend hours in the shed behind the house, fixing something I never knew. From the beginning, something wasn't right. The atmosphere in the house felt heavy, oppressive. The lights flickered strangely, and the doors were always locked. When I asked Susanna about it, she told me it was for security, but I wasn't convinced. No one in the town ever mentioned them, and no one seemed to visit. The house felt completely isolated, and even though the other houses weren't far away, no one seemed interested in venturing beyond their own neighborhood. At first, everything was quiet, but soon I began to notice strange things. Whispers, shadows moving around the house when no one was there. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then things started happening that I couldn't ignore. One night as I walked down the hall to go to the bathroom, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. The house was empty. Everyone else was asleep. However, the feeling that someone was watching me stayed with me. When I returned to my room, something on my bed had moved, as if someone had lain down there. But I was alone in my room. Fear settled in my chest, but I tried to ignore it. I thought maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. After all, I'd lived in so many places and had seen so many strange things. Then came a night, a particularly rainy one. When everything changed, I woke suddenly, as if I'd heard something. It wasn't just the rain. It was a metallic sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I got out of bed, still half asleep, and made my way to the living room. When I reached the end of the hall, I froze. Susanna was standing in front of one of the closed doors, listening, as if waiting for something. There was no light in the house, just the faint glow of the storm through the dirty windows. Suddenly, she turned toward me, her face expressionless, as if she had never seen me before. Her eyes were dark, empty, as if she had forgotten what it meant to be human. She didn't speak. She just stared at me, waiting for me to say something, but I couldn't. The door behind her slowly opened, and a low, unintelligible whisper emerged from the darkness on the other side. Susanna didn't move or blink. It was then I realized she knew something I didn't. a truth I didn't want to understand. The door slammed shut, and when I turned to run, the house fell silent. The storm outside ceased, and all that was left was an overwhelming sense of coldness that seemed to pierce my bones. The next day, everything seemed normal. Susanna acted as if nothing had happened, and Louise was quieter than usual. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't want to know. But deep down, anxiety gnawed at me. I began to pay more attention to every corner of the house. I noticed that Louise's shed had been locked with a heavy lock, something that hadn't been there before. I felt like something was being hidden, something important. Weeks later, I received a call from the police. They had found a young woman who had been kept locked in the attic of the house by Susanna and Louise. She had managed to escape and contact the authorities. In her desperation, she had mentioned me. Although she didn't know who I was, she described how she had seen me on several occasions and how our paths crossed from a distance, all while she was confined. The police acted quickly. They launched an operation, and the rescue was successful. The girl was dirty and weak but alive, with irrefutable evidence of what had been happening in that house. Susanna and Louise were arrested, and police reports confirmed that the young woman had been locked away for months, isolated and abused. She was not the only one. The disappearances of young people in the area over the years had been attributed to mysterious circumstances. But now, the truth was revealed. The truth was even more disturbing than I could have imagined. Susanna and Louise hadn't just adopted children under the guise of being a loving family. They had been keeping them captive, hiding them from the outside world. When the police investigated, they uncovered even darker details about their secret life. In the shed behind the house, they discovered personal belongings of other victims, people who had suffered the same fate. The most shocking revelation was that the young woman who managed to escape, Laura, had been living in that house for years. Long before me, she had been one of the first victims, yet somehow she survived. But the trauma she had endured left her a hollow shell of a person. When I finally met her, her eyes were empty, as if a part of her had died within those walls. Susanna and Louise were arrested on charges of kidnapping, abuse, and murder. Though the police could never determine how many people they had harmed, the evidence they found was enough to convict them. The trial was swift, but no legal action could undo the horrors that had been done. At least their conviction brought closure to a dark chapter in my life. Laura stayed in a rehabilitation center, but I couldn't escape the guilt that haunted me. How had I missed the signs? Why hadn't I seen it sooner? The weight of responsibility consumed me for a long time. Years have passed, but the rain still falls on the town, and though I no longer live there, I know that the memory of that storm will always remain with me. The shadows of the past, when they merge with reality, never truly fade. The doors of those houses, though closed, still whisper their secrets. Every time I hear the rain, I can't help but wonder what else is hidden in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. When I moved into the old building, I had an unsettling feeling from the start. The dampness in the hallways and the oppressive atmosphere made it hard to ignore. The floors creaked beneath my footsteps, as if the building itself was protesting my presence. The walls seemed to harbor secrets, tales that no one dared to tell. But I couldn't afford to be picky. It was cheap and close to the university, so I tried to dismiss the discomfort. Life went on without incident until I started noticing something strange about my neighbor in apartment 17. I didn't see him often, but when I did, he struck me as unusual. He was a tall, thin man with an emotionless face and dark eyes that felt unsettling if you looked at him too long. He was always impeccably dressed in suits, as though he worked in a prestigious office. Yet I never saw him leave in the mornings, or really at all. The first sign that something was wrong came on a rainy night. I was reading a book when I heard a constant dragging sound from next door. At first, I thought it was just the usual sounds of the building, but when it went on for hours, I couldn't ignore it. I opened the window to get some air, and that's when I smelled it. A foul, nauseating odor seeped through the shared wall. It wasn't the smell of plumbing issues. It was something deeper, more putrid, as though something was decaying on the other side. I convinced myself it was just my imagination and tried to ignore it, but the smell lingered, and over the next few days, my discomfort grew. I started noticing other oddities. The windows in his apartment were always closed, even on the hottest days. Thick curtains blocked any view inside, and I never heard any noise from the apartment, not even a TV or music. It was as though the place was completely isolated. One day I saw him carrying something large and cumbersome into his apartment. At first I thought it was just a trunk, but the way he handled it caught my attention. His expression was cold and distant, and his movements were calculated, almost like he was following some strict procedure. I tried to look away, but our eyes met for a brief moment. That night the smell was unbearable. I woke up in the middle of the night, certain something was wrong. The stench was so overpowering, it seemed to be coming from the shared wall. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly off. I became obsessed with listening to the sounds coming from his apartment. It was always quiet for a while. Then suddenly, there would be sounds of heavy objects being moved, or worse. I called the building management to complain, but I got vague responses. No one wanted to get involved. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I waited for him to leave, though he rarely did, and approached his door. It was solid wood, reinforced with a lock that seemed unusually secure, as if no one was supposed to get in. A few months earlier, I had noticed missing person posters around the building, one for a woman, then another. Each time I passed by, more appeared. I couldn't help but think my neighbor was somehow connected to these disappearances. One rainy night, when the weather seemed to mirror my mounting anxiety, I could stand it no longer. The stench was so overpowering that I called the police. I tried to explain what I had been hearing and smelling, but I was so flustered, I could barely get the words out. All I could manage was that something terrible was happening in apartment 17. When the police arrived, the rain was relentless. They knocked on the door several times, but there was no answer. Finally, they forced the door open. What they found inside was beyond anything they were prepared for. The apartment was nearly empty, except for a metal table covered in surgical tools. The walls were covered in plastic sheeting, and in one corner a tank of acid bubbled slowly. Inside that tank they found human remains. The man in apartment 17 had been dismembering his victims and hiding the remains in the building's drainage system. He was arrested that night, his face as expressionless as ever. I felt both relief and horror when I saw him in handcuffs. I had been living next to a monster, someone who had hidden his crimes in plain sight for months, perhaps years. Further investigations revealed that he had a carefully crafted routine. He frequented nightclubs, where his appearance and charm attracted his victims. In those places he transformed into someone else, a suave, confident man who seemed trustworthy. He knew how to gain a woman's trust, offering companionship and a safe ride home. But once his victims entered his apartment, they never left. The soundproof walls muffled their screams, and the smell afterward was the only clue to their fate. The police found evidence linking him to several disappearances, including wallets and jewelry that belonged to the victims. The contrast between the vibrant life of the nightclubs and the macabre isolation of his apartment made his story all the more chilling. He had used the chaos and distraction of nightlife to hide in plain sight, becoming a predator lurking in the shadows. Since I started dating Camilla, my life had taken a new direction. She was intelligent, beautiful, and had a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the only thing that mattered. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. I felt lucky to have her by my side, though I noticed some small cracks in our relationship. I chose to ignore them. I thought we all had flaws, and love was what mattered most. My brother Daniel was also an important part of my life. We had always been close, even though we were different in many ways. While I was reserved, Daniel was the life of the party, always outgoing and charismatic. I introduced him to Camilla shortly after we started dating, and at first, everything seemed fine. They got along well, maybe even too well, but I didn't think much of it at first. I thought it was just a sign that my family supported my relationship. As time passed, small details began to bother me. Camila started distancing herself. Her messages became less frequent, her affection less evident, and her excuses for being absent became more common. At the same time, Daniel seemed to be spending more time at my place. He said he was looking for work and preferred staying with me to save money. Though I appreciated his company, it was hard to ignore how his visits always seemed to coincide with Camila's absences. I thought I was just being paranoid, but the signs kept adding up. There were moments when Daniel and Camilla exchanged awkward glances, when their behavior around each other felt off. Something wasn't adding up. Then, on a rainy night, everything came to a head. When my suspicions began to form, I was working late in my office, trying to focus as the rain battered against the windows. That's when I saw Daniel leaving my building. He was dressed more formally than usual and got into a taxi. It might not have seemed odd at first, but just 5 minutes later, I received a message from Camilla saying she couldn't meet me that night. The timing struck me as too coincidental to ignore. I tried to reason it away. Maybe Daniel had a social engagement and Camilla was truly busy. But the coincidence was undeniable. I began paying closer attention, noting every excuse, every little inconsistency. Camilla became increasingly distant, while Daniel, on the other hand, seemed more carefree and at ease. It was as if they were both performing in a play, but the pieces weren't fitting together. The confirmation came days later when Camilla left her phone unlocked on the table while she went to the bathroom. I'm not the type to snoop, but I couldn't resist. I opened her messages, and there they were, conversations between her and Daniel that left no room for doubt. Not only were they discussing their relationship, but some of their messages suggested something far worse. Phrases like, "This won't be a problem for much longer. Soon, it will be just you and me," made it clear they were planning something. Heart raced as I scrolled through the messages, disbelief and horror creeping in. The worst part came when I found an attachment, a list of things to do, with one item highlighted in red. make it look like an accident. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't believe my own brother and the woman I loved were conspiring to murder me. All the moments I had shared with them flashed in my mind. Every laugh, every hug, now stained by a darkness I never imagined. That night, as the rain fell harder than ever, I knew I couldn't do nothing. I returned home with my heart pounding, trying not to show what I knew. Camila acted as if everything was normal, while Daniel showed up later, bringing beers and pretending like nothing had changed. His carefree attitude only made his hypocrisy more obvious. I locked myself in my room, listening to them laughing in the living room. Every laugh felt like a stab to my heart. I transferred all the evidence to a USB stick. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. It was 2 against 1, and they clearly had no qualms about going to extreme lengths. I waited for them to get distracted before slipping out of the apartment. Under the cover of the rain, I made my way to the nearest police station. The city was empty at that hour, and the sound of my footsteps echoed through the streets, amplified by the silence. It felt as if the rain was trying to erase me, dragging me into an abyss of paranoia and despair. At the station, I explained everything to the officers, my voice trembling but resolute. I showed them the screenshots, the list, the messages. This rain intensified as I spoke, as though the world was reflecting my inner chaos. A few minutes later, they sent officers to my apartment, and I stayed behind, unable to face Camilla and Daniel. When they were arrested, we learned they had planned my murder with chilling precision. They had a solid alibi and a detailed plan to dispose of my body, making it look like a car accident. They had been plotting this while I remained naive, believing in the goodwill of those I loved. Since that night, rain has taken on a different meaning for me. It used to relax me, bring me peace. But now, every drop hitting the window is a reminder of the darkness that can reside in the hearts of those we trust most. I survived their betrayal, but the weight of their disloyalty still haunts me. Sometimes, I wonder how I could have been so blind, how love blinded me to what was right in front of me. But I also know that in the darkest moment, I made the right decision. I exposed their plot, and although the emotional scars will take time to heal, I can live knowing I did the right thing. The rain continues to mark my darkest nights, a reminder that true terror doesn't lie in monsters or ghosts, but in the people we allow into our lives and hearts. We lived in a neighborhood that seemed like it came out of a postcard. Quiet streets lined with trees, well-maintained gardens, and neighbors who always greeted one another with a smile. My wife, Laura, and I chose this place with the hope of giving our son, Thomas, a safe and happy childhood. My job as a police officer kept me on my toes. But at home, I could relax, thinking nothing could go wrong here. At least, that's what I believed. Everything started when Laura began talking about a new colleague at work, Andre. She described him as nice, maybe a little eccentric but harmless. At first, she only mentioned him sporadically, but over time, I noticed he was becoming a recurring topic. Her comments about him were a mixture of admiration and something I couldn't quite place, an unease she didn't fully express. One day, she mentioned that Andre had started paying her compliments. "Nothing out of the ordinary," she said, brushing it off. But something in her tone made me uneasy, as if there was more beneath the surface. As time went on, Laura seemed more reserved, more tense, especially when talking about work. One night, while checking her emails on the computer, I noticed she quickly closed the screen when she saw me. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but a feeling of discomfort settled in me. Then came the night of torrential rain. The wind howled, and the storm seemed unrelenting. Thomas was asleep in his room, and Laura and I were attempting to unwind in front of the TV. That's when I heard a noise at the back door, subtle, almost lost in the storm. But my training immediately kicked in. I got up, trying not to alarm Laura, and went to the kitchen where the noise had come from. The lock had been forced, and a cold draft was seeping in. I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from what I sensed. I threw open the door, expecting to find a burglar, but instead I froze. It was Andre. His face was soaked, but he didn't seem bothered by the rain. His eyes burned with a mixture of desperation and rage, and something in his expression told me this wasn't a spontaneous act. He had been planning this. He rushed inside, closing the door behind him, and started advancing toward me. I tried to stay calm, but his presence was overpowering. The intensity of his gaze and the way he clenched his fists told me he was ready for anything. There was more than anger in his eyes. There was obsession. Then I heard Laura scream from the living room. Andre's focus immediately shifted to her. That's when it became clear he was after her, and I was nothing more than an obstacle. Andre moved toward the living room, ignoring me, and I stood there, frozen, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to use my gun, but his aggression left me with no choice. I stepped between him and Laura, and when he tried to attack me, I drew my gun and fired. The sound mixed with the thunder's roar, and Andre collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura stood frozen, her eyes filled with tears, and I covered Thomas's eyes so he wouldn't see Andre lying there. I called my colleagues at the station, trembling as I explained what happened. When they arrived, the scene was lit by red and blue lights, and Andre's pale face was illuminated in the chaos. That's when I learned more about him. Andre had suffered from severe bipolar disorder, and his manic episodes had grown worse. Without the attention he craved, his obsession with Laura spiraled out of control. That night changed our lives forever. Although I acted in self-defense and Andre was taken to the hospital for treatment, the weight of what had happened never left me. At the time, I didn't understand his disorder or his obsession, only the immediate danger he posed to my family. But when the adrenaline wore off, the emotional burden hit me like a ton of bricks. Laura and I spent weeks trying to return to normal. Thomas, despite his young age, understood more than we wanted him to. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" I didn't know how to answer, so I hugged him tightly as if that could protect him from everything that had happened. The shadow of that night stayed with us. Laura couldn't bring herself to go back to work, and I started avoiding going out at night. I found myself analyzing every person, every gesture, my instincts as a police officer turning into a constant weight. The tranquility of our neighborhood was shattered. Neighbors started installing security cameras and stronger locks, and organizing meetings to discuss how to keep the street safe. While no one spoke openly, we all knew that Andre's case had shaken us. The fear was no longer just about strangers or intruders. It was the fear that someone close to us could become dangerous. Eventually, Andre was transferred to a mental health facility. His family sent us a letter apologizing for what had happened, explaining they never imagined his condition would lead him to such extremes. Although I understood their pain, reading their words did little to ease my own guilt. That night, I learned an invaluable lesson. Even in the safest of homes, danger can creep in, silent and deadly. Every time I hear the rain on the roof, my mind goes back to that night. I often find myself thinking about Andreas, about how his obsession led him to cross a line he should never have crossed. I still remember the look in his eyes before everything unfolded, a mixture of desperation and determination that haunts me to this day. I think about Laura and Thomas and how close I came to losing them. It reminds me just how fragile the security we take for granted really is. Rain, which I once found calming, now constantly brings me back to that night. Its sound has become a trigger, putting me on alert. At times, I catch myself getting up and walking through the house, making sure the doors are locked, checking that Thomas is asleep, and ensuring Laura is calm. I've realized that I no longer hear the rain the same way. Its pounding now serves as a reminder of how fragile peace is and the darkness that can dwell in the minds of those around us. But despite everything, I've also learned something important. While that night took away some of our peace, it also brought Laura and me closer together. With our emotional wounds still fresh, we began to rebuild what we had lost, supporting each other through the process. We understood that, while terror hadn't defeated us, life goes on, though not without its scars. Those scars hurt, but they also remind me that we fought for what matters most, our family. I value each moment more now. The sound of Thomas laughing, the way Laura looks at me. I've come to understand that while I can't control everything, I can be present and protect my loved ones more fiercely than before. The rain may keep falling, but I don't fear it the way I once did. Instead, I've learned to live with its sound, like someone who learns to live with the echo of a storm. It was a storm that, though devastating, didn't destroy everything. That night, the rain fell relentlessly. The windshield wipers of my car fought futilely against the heavy downpour, turning the road into a river of shadows and distorted reflections. Exhausted from a long day at work, all I wanted was to get home and unwind. I found myself driving down a desolate road, winding through a forest, desperate to reach the safety of my living room. Suddenly, the car jerked. The speedometer dropped and the engine sputtered to a stop. Frustrated, I tried to restart it, but the engine was silent. I wiped my damp face, unsure whether the moisture was from sweat or the rain, and looked around. There was no sign of life, no passing cars. I checked my phone, but of course, there was no signal. The rain was the only sound, relentless and oppressive. Minutes turned to hours, and the unease in my chest grew. There was something unsettling about the isolation, the constant rainfall, and the unnerving silence of the forest. Suddenly, headlights broke through the darkness, followed by the sound of tires splashing through puddles. Relief and fear collided in my chest as I stepped out of the car, waving my arms to catch the attention of the approaching vehicle. A black pickup truck pulled up beside me, its headlights blinding me. The driver, a large man with broad shoulders and a face marked by scars, rolled down his window. Something about him put me on edge. His cold, emotionless gaze seemed to look right through me, and I could sense that something wasn't right. When I explained my situation, he barely responded, only gesturing to the back of his truck. That's when I saw her, tied up, her hands bound, her mouth covered with duct tape. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto mine for a split second. It was a silent scream, pleading for help. The man noticed my gaze and quickly shut the back door, his posture shifting into something threatening. Every instinct screamed at me to do something. But what could I do? I was alone with this man, armed only with my wits. As he pretended to check something in the back of his truck, I tried to stay calm, searching the trunk of my car for anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing. The seconds stretched into eternity as I fought to control my rising panic. Then, another set of headlights appeared. A police patrol car. Relief washed over me, but the situation was still far from over. The officers got out of their vehicle, flashlights in hand, and approached the truck. The driver's nervousness was evident as he tried to explain his presence, but his excuses were weak and incoherent. One officer demanded that he open the back of the truck, and when he refused, the second officer drew his weapon and ordered him to step aside. Tension filled the air. The officers opened the truck's door, and there, to my horror, was the young woman, pale and terrified, struggling to free herself from her restraints. The police acted quickly, and the man tried to flee, but it was futile. He was subdued in seconds, his earlier confidence now replaced with desperation. The woman was rescued and taken to the patrol car, while the man was handcuffed and placed in the police vehicle. The officers checked in with me, making sure I was okay, though my car was still broken down and the rain hadn't let up. It didn't matter. What I had witnessed that night, true evil, not in a monster but in a human being, left its mark on me. I spent weeks replaying the events of that night. Every raindrop against my windows took me back to the young woman's terrified eyes, the man's cold expression, and the relief that came with the police's timely arrival. I often wondered what would have happened if they hadn't come. Would I have had the courage to confront the man, or would I have become just another victim? The terror I experienced that night wasn't supernatural. It was a fear deeply rooted in human nature. The darkness we face isn't always a ghost or a monster, but the potential for cruelty that resides in people. Despite the fear, I learned that hope can arrive when it's needed most. Now, every time I drive down a quiet road, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those headlights again. The rain continues to fall, both in my memories and in reality, reminding me that true terror isn't something imaginary. It's real, and it can be found in the minds of people who, under certain circumstances, reveal their darkest sides. I've always believed there's something special about the woods, a connection to nature that feels primal and deep. That's why, when I decided to take Claudia, my fiancée, camping in a remote location for the weekend, I was convinced it would be an unforgettable experience. Just us, the silence of nature, and the stars above our heads. We chose a secluded spot near a river surrounded by tall trees. It was perfect for unwinding far from the distractions of everyday life. Claudia, though excited, expressed a little worry about the isolation. "We just need to watch out for animals," she said, ever cautious. But I reassured her that everything would be fine. We were far from civilization, surrounded by beauty and peace. The first day went smoothly. We set up the tent, gathered firewood, and explored the forest trails. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and we prepared for the evening. The campfire provided warmth, and the crackling of the wood was the only sound in the forest. We talked about our future, our hopes, and our dreams. It was the perfect night, simple and quiet. But that tranquility didn't last. As the rain began to fall, it started slowly, but soon turned into a heavy downpour. The wind howled through the trees, and the storm surrounded us completely. We retreated into the tent, waiting for the storm to pass, but the rain didn't let up. Hours passed, and the air grew colder. The dampness seemed to seep into our bones. We huddled together in our sleeping bags, trying to stay warm. The storm grew louder, its intensity deafening as the rain pounded the tent. Claudia, who had been enjoying the atmosphere at first, began to look uneasy. "I don't like the way those noises sound," she said, referring to the wind and the strange creaking noises coming from the trees. I tried to reassure her that it was just the storm, but even I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. Something wasn't right. The wind howled again, but this time it was mixed with another noise, a rustling from beyond the tent. At first, I tried to ignore it, convinced it was just the storm's pressure on the trees. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. Someone or something was walking near us. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag, the light flickering before it stabilized. I scanned the area around the tent, but saw nothing, just the trees swaying in the wind. Claudia was frightened, and the fear in my chest grew with each passing moment. Something wasn't right. The feeling that we weren't alone was overwhelming. Unable to shake it, I decided to step out of the tent to check the surroundings, flashlight in hand. Claudia protested, urging me to stay inside because of the storm, but I couldn't just do nothing. I walked a few meters around the camp, the flashlight cutting through the heavy rain, illuminating the trees and the muddy ground beneath my feet. The torrential rain made visibility difficult, and every step I took echoed in the eerie silence of the storm. Then, something caught my eye. Footprints. Recent ones. They didn't belong to any animal. They were human. A chill ran through me. We weren't alone. Someone else was in the forest with us, but who? Was it a lost traveler? Or someone with more sinister intentions? My thoughts raced, but all I could do was hurry back to the tent and make sure it was secured. I ran back, heart pounding. Claudia was waiting, visibly anxious. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. I explained what I had seen, my own voice shaky with fear. We decided to close off all the tent entrances and wait for the storm to pass. But the fear lingered. Those footprints were still, fresh in my mind. Every gust of wind, every creak of the trees, made it feel like someone was getting closer. The hours dragged on, the storm showing no sign of letting up. The tension kept building, and the sound of footsteps echoed in my mind. Who was out there? What did they want? We were trapped in a state of uncertainty, unsure if we were being stalked, or if it was all just our paranoia, fueled by the storm. Then, in the distance, something caught my eye. Faint light moving. I squinted through the storm, and there it was. A figure walking among the trees, holding a flashlight. Was it a lost traveler, a hunter, or something far more dangerous? Deep down, I knew this person shouldn't be here. I couldn't wait any longer. If someone had bad intentions, we couldn't stay defenseless. I grabbed the flashlight and left the tent, trying to move quietly. Claudia tried to stop me, but I knew I couldn't take the risk of being caught off guard. I carefully made my way through the forest, following the light that flickered in the distance. The trees seemed to twist into a maze, and the wind howled around me. I felt like something was watching, lurking just beyond the shadows. Finally, I reached a clearing, and there he was, the figure I had been following. As I got closer, my blood ran cold. This wasn't a lost traveler or a hunter. It was a man, his eyes cold and deranged. He held a rope and a knife in his hands. Before I could react, he charged at me. My survival instincts kicked in, and I jumped out of the way, narrowly avoiding his knife. The man lunged at me again, but I managed to strike him, causing him to stumble. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my arm, as though I'd been hit. I looked and saw Claudia standing behind the man, holding a large rock she had picked up from the ground. The man fell to the ground, dazed from the blow. I seized the opportunity, grabbing him and using his own knife to neutralize him. The chaos of fear, blood, and rain blurred everything around me. When it was over, the storm seemed to subside. The rain slowed, leaving behind an eerie stillness, as though the world was holding its breath. Claudia and I exchanged a weary glance, exhausted but relieved. We had survived, but something inside told us that our lives would never be the same. The sky cleared, a pale gray replacing the darkness. But the storm left behind a heavy silence that seemed to press down on us. We couldn't stay there any longer. Wordlessly, we grabbed our backpacks and made our way to the car, each step heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Every crack of branches, every movement among the trees made us look back in fear, knowing that something we couldn't see, was still out there, watching us. When we reached the car, we got in without speaking a word. The engine started, and we drove away, not looking back. We didn't talk about what happened during the drive. Our minds were too focused on what we had just experienced. We couldn't find any explanation for it. No logical reasoning made sense. When we got to the city, we just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. We left the camp behind without telling anyone what had happened. We didn't want to relive it by sharing the details. We never spoke to anyone about that night. Even the thought of discussing it seemed to make it real again. We never checked the news, never asked about an investigation, because we feared that the echoes of that night would catch up with us. We never found out who the man was, why he was there, or what he wanted. No one reported anything about the event. The forest remained as dark and silent as ever. Though we were alive, we could never shake the feeling that something was still following us. Something unseen, but always just behind us. It was a dark night, the kind where the wind howls like a wild animal, and the rain falls with the weight of 1,000 lost souls. What had started as a light drizzle had turned into a roaring storm as the hours passed. The rain hammered the windows, and the wind howled through the cracks in the house, making it feel as though we were trapped in an unending nightmare. But the worst part wasn't the storm, or the cold creeping through the walls. It was what was happening right inside the house. My brother and I had always been close. Growing up together in that house, we shared countless memories, laughter, mischief, everything that bonds siblings. He was always calm and reasonable, the one who took care of me when life overwhelmed me. That night, however, something felt wrong. Perhaps it was the way the wind hit the door, or how the shadows seemed longer than usual. The air was thick with an unsettling tension that I could feel deep in my bones. My brother was sitting on the couch watching TV while I was getting ready for bed. The storm outside was so loud I barely noticed. When I finally lay down, the rain lulling me to sleep in an odd, peaceful way. Then, the wind's howl turned into a crackling noise, followed by a loud bang against the door. That's when the terror started. Before I could react, the front door burst open, and 3 dark figures rushed into the house. There were no screams, no time to process anything. The men entered silently, their presence like shadows creeping across the floor. My brother stood up from the couch but didn't make it far. One of the men grabbed him with terrifying strength. I froze, paralyzed by fear. I could only hear the rumbling storm and the intruder's heavy breathing. I didn't understand what was happening. There were no demands, no threats, just swift, calculated movements. The men dragged my brother toward the door. One of them stayed behind, staring at me, his eyes filled with an unsettling intensity. For a moment, I wondered if he was enjoying my terror. But then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the storm, just like the others. The silence that followed was suffocating. I didn't know if the fear had left me speechless, or if I had witnessed something so inhuman I couldn't process it. My heart pounded in my chest. I ran to the door, but by the time I reached it, the men were gone, leaving only the storm behind. Ran outside, shouting my brother's name, but there was no answer. The darkness swallowed my cries. When I went back inside, the house was a mess. The intruders had clearly taken their time, but there was no sign of my brother. I called the police, knowing there was little they could do. By the time they arrived, an hour had passed. They asked the usual questions, took fingerprints, but it was clear there would be no resolution. My brother was gone, and I had no idea why. The police did their best, but it soon became apparent that they had no answers. The men had disappeared without a trace, no witnesses, no clues. The storm had covered everything, hiding their tracks. Days passed without any news, and the agony of waiting only grew. The more time passed, the more the guilt gnawed at me. Why hadn't I acted sooner? My brother's terrified face, the image of him being dragged away, haunted me. I don't know if my brother had enemies, if something from his past had caught up with him, or if there was something hidden that I never knew about. He had always been a good man, but like everyone, he had secrets. But I never imagined those secrets could lead to something like this. The storm continued throughout the night. I stayed in the same chair where I had last seen him, waiting for any sign that he might come back. But he didn't. The police did their part, but with each passing day, their answers grew vaguer. The men were like shadows, disappearing as if they had never been there at all. I never found out the truth. My brother's disappearance remains a mystery, and the storm that night feels like it took more than just him. It took the answers, too. The storm has subsided, but the emptiness inside me lingers. In the quiet of the night, I always have the unsettling feeling that something or someone is watching, waiting for me to witness yet another disappearance. My brother is gone, and I remain trapped in the fog of oblivion, desperately seeking answers I fear I may never find. The storm took everything, my peace, my sense of security, and every day, despair consumes me more. That night started like any other, with another shift at the gas station where I'd been working for nearly 3 years. It was a lonely job, especially during the night shift. The constant hum of the fluorescent lights, the sound of windshield wipers on cars pulling in for fuel, and the routine of serving sleepy or intoxicated drivers. It was all too familiar. The rain pelting the roof created a relentless symphony that blended with the noise of passing vehicles. Most nights felt endless, with only a few cars arriving each hour, leaving the gas station feeling like a forgotten island amid the storm. However, that night felt different. There was a strange, undefined tension in the air that had been lingering since I took my seat in the small security booth. The storm was so intense that I could barely see beyond the station's limits. The rain seemed determined to swallow everything, and the puddles on the ground reflected the station lights in an eerie way. Occasionally, a car would screech to a halt outside, but otherwise, everything remained eerily calm. The station was mostly deserted. Many others had closed for the night. I was left in the booth, watching the clock tick away, but it always seemed to stay in the same place. Then, around midnight, a pickup truck pulled in, its headlights briefly illuminating the station sign. I squinted to clear my vision. The truck was large, dark, and had an engine that rumbled ominously when it parked near the pump. I felt an inexplicable unease. I couldn't make out the driver's face through the rain on the windows, but something told me not to approach immediately. I decided to wait and observe from the booth's window. I didn't want to avoid helping the customer. Something about the truck's behavior just felt off. The truck stayed parked longer than usual for a refuel, and there was no movement inside. The silence, the stillness. It was unnerving. Minutes passed. The rain fell relentlessly, and then I saw a figure step out of the truck. He was wearing a black jacket and a hat, and his demeanor, the way he moved, filled me with a sense of alarm. It was a feeling of imminent danger that I couldn't explain, but it gripped me tightly. The man approached the gas pump, but he didn't act like a regular customer. Instead, he slowly made his way toward my booth. My heart raced as my unease grew stronger. My mind, fueled by horror movies and stories of crime, began imagining the worst possible scenarios. The man stopped directly in front of the booth, his shadow casting across the glass. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me. His gaze was unnervingly intense, as though he was studying me, sizing me up. The storm's fury continued overhead, but outside, everything felt strangely quiet, as if the world beyond the gas station no longer existed. I froze, afraid that any movement might set something off. Suddenly, the man raised his hand and slammed it against the booth window. The sound echoed through the small space, making me jump. I tried to breathe deeply, forcing myself to remain calm, but fear crept into every corner of my mind. I wanted to call the police, but the line was dead, probably because of the storm. The signal had been out for minutes, leaving me completely alone and unable to call for help. I looked around for something to defend myself with, but there was nothing. Only a small lamp sat in the corner. The man continued watching me silently, and the tension in the air grew. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped back and moved away from the window. My breathing relaxed for a moment, but I knew better than to let my guard down. I peered out the window and saw him walk to the back of his truck, where something in the back seat caught my attention. It was a human-shaped lump covered by a blanket. My heart skipped a beat. I instantly knew what was happening. The man returned to the front of the truck, and I saw him take something from his jacket. I couldn't see clearly what it was, but the metallic glint in the light told me it was something dangerous. My stomach sank as terror overwhelmed me. I was trapped in the booth, with no way to escape, and an armed man outside. I scanned the area for a way out, but nothing seemed safe. The warehouse next door seemed like my best option, but I had no idea what other threats might be waiting there. Suddenly, I felt the walls closing in. The man approached the window again, this time wearing a twisted grin. He stared at me with a cold, calculating gaze before walking toward the booth door. I had to act quickly. I bolted for the back door of the booth, but just as I reached it, I heard rapid footsteps closing in on me. The front door of the booth burst open, and the man stood there again, knife in hand. My body reacted before my mind could. I ran toward the tool shed and threw myself inside, not daring to look back. The sound of the man's footsteps echoed in my mind, and panic took over my body. I crouched on the floor, breathing in quick gasps. The storm's roar drowned everything else out, but every crack in the shed's walls seemed to amplify my fear. I couldn't think clearly, my mind too clouded by terror. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the shed, and I saw the man's shadow outside. He was close, too close. I tensed, praying he wouldn't hear my breathing. The silence outside grew unbearable. I could hear the wind and rain, but nothing else. It was as if the world had disappeared, leaving only the two of us in this deadly standoff. I slowly rose to my feet, moving toward the back door. I could escape if I was quick enough, but fear still gripped me, and the rain made everything harder. Then, a loud bang shattered the stillness. The shed door slammed open. My heart stopped. Before I could react, a shadow slipped inside. I grabbed the nearest tool, a hammer, and gripped it with both hands, ready to defend myself. The man advanced, his face twisted with desperation and fury. He was too close. I swung the hammer, but he dodged it with ease, knocking me off balance. The force of his reaction sent me crashing to the ground, but instinct kicked in, and I rolled quickly, getting back on my feet. I saw the door, my only chance. I ran toward it, not daring to look back. The rain hit me like needles as I sprinted down the gas station's path. My legs burned, and my lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't stop. I had to make it to the main road. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. It was my chance. I waved my arms frantically, shouting for the driver to see me. The car slowed, then swerved toward me. My heart raced. The vehicle stopped right next to me. Without hesitation, I threw open the back door and climbed in. The storm still raged outside, but I was safe now. I looked back, but the man was gone. The driver glanced at me with concern, but I was too exhausted to speak. The road ahead was empty, and with each passing mile the fear began to fade. But one thing was certain. The gas station and everything that happened that night would remain a mystery. No one ever talked about it again. No one believed me. Not the police. Not even the driver who rescued me. There was no evidence, no clues. All that remained was the fear. Working in a nightclub isn't what most people expect. They imagine a place full of music, lights, and fun. But for those of us who work there, it's just a job. One we do to make ends meet. I never paid much attention to what happened inside the club, as long as my shift went smoothly. But that night, everything changed, and I realized that in a place like that, danger doesn't always come from what we can see. The storm outside raged fiercely, rain battering the windows as if trying to shatter them. Inside, the club's bright lights flickered in response to the wind. The dance floor was crowded, with some customers enjoying themselves more than others, but most were lost in the music. I stood at my usual spot near the bar, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. That night, though, the atmosphere shifted. A chill ran down my spine as I noticed the change. At first, I couldn't pinpoint what was different, but the energy had shifted. The customers seemed more tense. Conversations grew quieter, and some exchanged nervous glances. The neon lights, which usually added to the festive atmosphere, began to flicker. The music, too, seemed to fade, as if it were trapped beneath a fog. Then, I saw them. 4 men, their faces hidden under caps and scarves, entering the club. They didn't look like regulars. My instincts screamed that something was off, but I stayed calm. There were always odd characters in the club, after all. Yet, something about these men set my nerves on edge. They moved with purpose, carrying backpacks, as though they were preparing for something. The tension in the room grew with each step they took. The tallest man walked toward the center of the dance floor, while the others spread out. At first, the customers didn't seem to notice, but then the man in the center pulled a large caliber revolver from his jacket and fired it into the air. The sound of the shots rang out, and the club froze. Panic spread instantly. Some screamed, others tried to flee, but the man approached the bar. The smallest of the 4 pulled out guns, ordering everyone to lie on the floor. I obeyed, knowing there was no other choice. The shots echoed in the background, but what scared me the most was the silence that followed. Time seemed to stretch as I lay there, feeling more and more trapped in the darkness they had brought with them. No one knew what to expect. Suddenly, one of the men began shouting commands, searching for something I couldn't quite understand at the time. He scanned the room, forcing people to stand up one by one. No one dared to resist. There was no space left to fight back. We were completely trapped at their mercy. It was in that moment that I realized the storm outside wasn't the only thing suffocating me. There was something else in the air, something far heavier than the rain, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Meanwhile, the other 2 men were busy rifling through customers' backpacks, gathering anything they could carry. The chaos unfolding made no sense, and all I wanted was for it to end, for the nightmare to be over. The lights flickered more violently as the storm raged outside, and the sound of screams blended with the crunch of broken glass. I was so focused on the chaos unfolding before me that I didn't notice one of the men moving closer. He pointed a gun at me and ordered me to stand up. I tried to stay calm, but terror had completely overtaken me. I knew that if I made any wrong move, it would be over in an instant. My mind raced, searching for any way out, but there was no escape. The man dragged me to the back of the club, where the others were waiting. At any moment, I could feel the cold barrel of a gun aimed at me, knowing that any attempt to fight back could be my last. Then, around midnight, a pickup truck pulled in, its headlights briefly illuminating the station sign. I squinted to clear my vision. The truck was large, dark, and had an engine that rumbled ominously when it parked near the pump. I felt an inexplicable unease. I couldn't make out the driver's face through the rain on the windows, but something told me not to approach immediately. I decided to wait and observe from the booth's window. I didn't want to avoid helping the customer. Something about the truck's behavior just felt off. The truck stayed parked longer than usual for a refuel, and there was no movement inside. The silence, the stillness. It was unnerving. Minutes passed. The rain fell relentlessly, and then I saw a figure step out of the truck. He was wearing a black jacket and a hat, and his demeanor, the way he moved, filled me with a sense of alarm. It was a feeling of imminent danger that I couldn't explain, but it gripped me tightly. The man approached the gas pump, but he didn't act like a regular customer. Instead, he slowly made his way toward my booth. My heart raced as my unease grew stronger. My mind, fueled by horror movies and stories of crime, began imagining the worst possible scenarios. The man stopped directly in front of the booth, his shadow casting across the glass. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me. His gaze was unnervingly intense, as though he was studying me, sizing me up. The storm's fury continued overhead, but outside, everything felt strangely quiet, as if the world beyond the gas station no longer existed. I froze, afraid that any movement might set something off. Suddenly, the man raised his hand and slammed it against the booth window. The sound echoed through the small space, making me jump. I tried to breathe deeply, forcing myself to remain calm, but fear crept into every corner of my mind. I wanted to call the police, but the line was dead, probably because of the storm. The signal had been out for minutes, leaving me completely alone and unable to call for help. I looked around for something to defend myself with, but there was nothing. Only a small lamp sat in the corner. The man continued watching me silently, and the tension in the air grew. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped back and moved away from the window. My breathing relaxed for a moment, but I knew better than to let my guard down. I peered out the window and saw him walk to the back of his truck, where something in the back seat caught my attention. It was a human-shaped lump covered by a blanket. My heart skipped a beat. I instantly knew what was happening. The man returned to the front of the truck, and I saw him take something from his jacket. I couldn't see clearly what it was, but the metallic glint in the light told me it was something dangerous. My stomach sank as terror overwhelmed me. I was trapped in the booth, with no way to escape, and an armed man outside. I scanned the area for a way out, but nothing seemed safe. The warehouse next door seemed like my best option, but I had no idea what other threats might be waiting there. Suddenly, I felt the walls closing in. The man approached the window again, this time wearing a twisted grin. He stared at me with a cold, calculating gaze before walking toward the booth door. I had to act quickly. I bolted for the back door of the booth, but just as I reached it, I heard rapid footsteps closing in on me. The front door of the booth burst open, and the man stood there again, knife in hand. My body reacted before my mind could. I ran toward the tool shed and threw myself inside, not daring to look back. The sound of the man's footsteps echoed in my mind, and panic took over my body. I crouched on the floor, breathing in quick gasps. The storm's roar drowned everything else out, but every crack in the shed's walls seemed to amplify my fear. I couldn't think clearly. my mind too clouded by terror. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the shed, and I saw the man's shadow outside. He was close, too close. I tensed, praying he wouldn't hear my breathing. The silence outside grew unbearable. I could hear the wind and rain, but nothing else. It was as if the world had disappeared, leaving only the two of us in this deadly standoff. I slowly rose to my feet, moving toward the back door. I could escape if I was quick enough, but fear still gripped me, and the rain made everything harder. Then, a loud bang shattered the stillness. The shed door slammed open. My heart stopped. Before I could react, a shadow slipped inside. I grabbed the nearest tool, a hammer, and gripped it with both hands, ready to defend myself. The man advanced, his face twisted with desperation and fury. He was too close. I swung the hammer, but he dodged it with ease, knocking me off balance. The force of his reaction sent me crashing to the ground, but instinct kicked in, and I rolled quickly, getting back on my feet. I saw the door, my only chance. I ran toward it, not daring to look back. The rain hit me like needles as I sprinted down the gas station's path. My legs burned, and my lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't stop. I had to make it to the main road. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. It was my chance. I waved my arms frantically, shouting for the driver to see me. The car slowed, then swerved toward me. My heart raced. The vehicle stopped right next to me. Without hesitation, I threw open the back door and climbed in. The storm still raged outside, but I was safe now. I looked back, but the man was gone. The driver glanced at me with concern, but I was too exhausted to speak. The road ahead was empty, and with each passing mile the fear began to fade. But one thing was certain. The gas station and everything that happened that night would remain a mystery. No one ever talked about it again. No one believed me. Not the police. Not even the driver who rescued me. There was no evidence, no clues. All that remained was the fear. Working in a nightclub isn't what most people expect. They imagine a place full of music, lights, and fun. But for those of us who work there, it's just a job. One we do to make ends meet. I never paid much attention to what happened inside the club, as long as my shift went smoothly. But that night, everything changed. And I realized that in a place like that, danger doesn't always come from what we can see. The storm outside raged fiercely, rain battering the windows as if trying to shatter them. Inside, the club's bright lights flickered in response to the wind. The dance floor was crowded, with some customers enjoying themselves more than others. But most were lost in the music. I stood at my usual spot near the bar, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. That night, though, the atmosphere shifted. A chill ran down my spine as I noticed the change. At first, I couldn't pinpoint what was different, but the energy had shifted. The customers seemed more tense. Conversations grew quieter, and some exchanged nervous glances. The neon lights, which usually added to the festive atmosphere, began to flicker. The music, too, seemed to fade, as if it were trapped beneath a fog. Then, I saw them. 4 men, their faces hidden under caps and scarves, entering the club. They didn't look like regulars. My instincts screamed that something was off, but I stayed calm. There were always odd characters in the club after all. Yet, Something about these men set my nerves on edge. They moved with purpose, carrying backpacks, as though they were preparing for something. The tension in the room grew with each step they took. The tallest man walked toward the center of the dance floor, while the others spread out. At first, the customers didn't seem to notice, but then the man in the center pulled a large caliber revolver from his jacket and fired it into the air. The sound of the shots rang out, and the club froze. Panic spread instantly. Some screamed, others tried to flee, but the man approached the bar. The smallest of the four pulled out guns, ordering everyone to lie on the floor. I obeyed, knowing there was no other choice. The shots echoed in the background, but what scared me the most was the silence that followed. Time seemed to stretch as I lay there, feeling more and more trapped in the darkness they had brought with them. No one knew what to expect. Suddenly, one of the men began shouting commands, searching for something I couldn't quite understand at the time. He scanned the room, forcing people to stand up one by one. No one dared to resist. There was no space left to fight back. We were completely trapped at their mercy. It was in that moment that I realized the storm outside wasn't the only thing suffocating me. There was something else in the air, something far heavier than the rain, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Meanwhile, the other two men were busy rifling through customers' backpacks, gathering anything they could carry. The chaos unfolding made no sense, and all I wanted was for it to end, for the nightmare to be over. The lights flickered more violently as the storm raged outside, and the sound of screams blended with the crunch of broken glass. I was so focused on the chaos unfolding before me that I didn't notice one of the men moving closer. He pointed a gun at me and ordered me to stand up. I tried to stay calm, but terror had completely overtaken me. I knew that if I made any wrong move, it would be over in an instant. My mind raced, searching for any way out, but there was no escape. The man dragged me to the back of the club, where the others were waiting. At any moment, I could feel the cold barrel of a gun aimed at me, knowing that any attempt to fight back could be my last. What happened next was even worse. The man who seemed to be in charge began speaking with his companions. I didn't understand what they were saying, but there was something in their tone that made me realize they were about to leave. They were going to vanish without a trace. Within minutes, they disappeared, and the club was empty. The rain continued to pound against the windows, but the silence inside was absolute. No footsteps, no sounds, just complete stillness. The nightmare was over, but the fear remained. When the officers arrived shortly after, they found no trace of the men. They had vanished as if they had never been there. The club returned to its normal routine over time, but I could never forget what happened that night. The feeling of being trapped, not knowing if I would make it out alive, stayed with me. The storm had ended, but the echo of fear was forever etched in my mind. And although the club resumed its regular activities, I could never shake the feeling of being unsafe. In a place like that, danger was always lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. I have always had a love for technology. Rainy nights like the one I was experiencing were perfect for staying inside, listening to the rain hitting the roof, and losing myself in the internet. My job was routine, leaving me little time for hobbies. So these late-night sessions on the computer became my escape. The storm started early that night. The wind howled, distant thunder rumbled, and the rain poured heavily. I closed the curtains, switched on my desk lamp, and opened my computer. At that hour, the forums and websites I frequented were a comfortable refuge, full of light-hearted entertainment, nothing out of the ordinary. But that night, something felt different. I don't know how it happened or when exactly I clicked the link that changed everything, but I ended up on a page unlike any other I had seen before. The design was crude, grim, with red text warning me to leave, but I ignored it. It looked like just another corner of the internet, filled with conspiracy theories and strange content. However, something about the page made me uneasy. The black background, distorted images, and a chilling sensation that someone was watching me. In the center of the page was a single link, highlighted in bold text. Enter and see the truth. I'm not sure what prompted me to click on it. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom. But I did. The screen went black for a moment, and I thought the page hadn't loaded. Then, suddenly, a pop-up appeared. It was a video. The video's quality was poor, as though filmed with an old camera in a poorly lit space. I could barely make anything out, just shadows and the flickering of a fluorescent light. The sound of dripping water echoed, and I felt a sense of dread building within me. It wasn't explicit yet, but the atmosphere was ominous. Few moments passed before a figure appeared on screen. A man in dirty overalls wearing a mask walked slowly through an empty room, holding a handheld camera. My heart stopped when I realized the camera was focused on something else. A chair in the center of the room. A woman was tied to it, her face partially hidden by her hair. But it was clear she was frightened. Her movements were slow, as if she were drugged or too weak to resist. The man with the mask stopped in front of her, setting the camera on a tripod. I tried to close the browser, but it wouldn't respond. It felt as though the page was blocking me, trapping me there. My mind screamed to turn off the computer, but some force inside me kept me watching, torn between terror and morbid curiosity. Then, he pulled out a long knife. There was no sound, but his gestures spoke volumes. He was taunting her, enjoying his control. He raised the knife, and the woman began to tremble. My heart raced as I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The knife came down, and blood splattered on the walls. My body froze. The video continued, though I couldn't process it all. All I could see was the horror, the violence, and the cruelty unfolding before me. I was nauseous, feeling as though I might faint. I tried again to close the browser, but it was still locked in place. The video seemed to force me to watch, to endure it to the end. I don't know how long I stared at it. The storm outside grew worse, and the thunder seemed to match the terror I felt, watching the screen. When the video finally ended, the screen went black. For a brief moment, I thought it was over, but then a message appeared in the center of the screen. You've seen it now. You're part of it. I slammed the computer shut, my breath heavy and rapid. The air felt thick, suffocating. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the blood, and I heard the screams. Though the video had no sound, the images haunted me. In the following days, the fear didn't subside. Every time I used the computer, I felt as though someone was watching me. I couldn't escape the images. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Who would believe something so horrific? But the worst part was knowing it was real. That woman was dead, and I had witnessed something that no one should ever see. The sound of the rain, once comforting, now reminded me of that nightmare, a constant reminder of the terror I couldn't shake. I wondered if the man in the mask knew I had watched, knew that I had seen his work. As a father, I never imagined that my greatest fear would come not from something external, but from the betrayal of someone I trusted with my most valuable possession, my children. Since the divorce, life had been a constant balancing act. My ex-wife, tired of our relationship and seeking a fresh start, had moved to another city, leaving me with full responsibility for our 2 young sons. Santiago, 8, was a curious, mature boy, while Jason, the youngest at 5, was more reserved, sweet, and dependent. I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I sought help. That's when I found Marina, the nanny, whom I believed was the perfect solution. Marina had a calm and gentle manner that instantly put me at ease. She had worked with several families and came highly recommended. Her references were impeccable, and she understood my situation with a warm smile that inspired confidence. She seemed to be exactly what we needed to bring stability amidst the chaos. But as I would discover, appearances can be deceiving. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. The children appeared comfortable with her, especially Jason, who rarely warmed up to strangers. Marina was organized, efficient, and attentive. She cooked healthy meals, kept the house tidy, and spent time playing with the boys. But over time, small details began to raise my concerns. Jason, who was usually very open with me, began to withdraw. When I asked about his day with Marina, he would answer in monosyllables or change the subject. Santiago, normally sociable, seemed distant with her, which was unusual. However, caught up in work and responsibilities, I convinced myself that it was simply a phase. One evening, as a storm raged outside, I went up to my office to finish some work while Marina took care of the children. The house was quiet, save for the sound of the storm. Around midnight, a faint noise disrupted my concentration. I initially dismissed it as the wind, but when the noise came again, clearer this time, I felt uneasy. I went downstairs, careful not to alarm anyone. The living room was empty, the lights off, and the front door was slightly ajar, letting in the cold air. That's when I heard the third noise, this time from outside. I stepped out onto the porch and saw Marina running toward the car, with Jason wrapped in a blanket. Jason appeared motionless, as though he were asleep, but the way Marina was holding him raised alarms. My heart raced. Without thinking, I ran toward her, shouting her name, but the storm drowned out my voice. Marina paused, looked toward me, and I saw a coldness in her eyes I hadn't noticed before, a chilling lack of empathy. She quickly opened the car door, trying to get Jason inside. Adrenaline surged through me, and I somehow found the strength to intercept her. There was a brief struggle, but I managed to grab Jason from her arms. I could feel him still breathing, though he seemed dazed as though sedated. Marina didn't try to take him back, but simply stared at me with a look of hatred and determination. Then, without a word, she disappeared into the darkness, vanishing into the rain and trees. I rushed back inside with Jason, making sure to lock the door behind me. My heart was still racing as I laid him down on the sofa. Santiago, awakened by the noise, came downstairs to help me check on his brother. Though scared, he seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. I spent the rest of the night watching over my children, every noise, every movement making me jump. I didn't know if Marina would return or if someone else was involved. All I knew was that this woman I had trusted had tried to take my son away, and I couldn't understand why. When dawn broke, I called the police and told them what happened. But when they investigated, they found no record of Marina. Her references, her ID, everything was fake. It was as though she had never existed. The authorities searched for clues, but the storm had washed away any trace of her. She simply disappeared without a trace, taking all the answers with her. Since that night, I've changed completely. I trust no one outside my inner circle and have become an overprotective father, always alert. Though time has helped the wounds heal, the fear never truly leaves. The image of Marina in the rain carrying my son still haunts me. I now know that there are people out there like her who hide behind a mask of normality, waiting for the right moment to destroy someone's life. It was a stormy night, a night when the rain pounded against the windows as if it had something urgent to say. My name is Lucas, and I'm not a man who is easily frightened. But what happened that night, several years ago, still follows me like a shadow. It's a constant reminder that true evil doesn't need masks or supernatural creatures. Human beings and their dark desires are enough. I lived in a small town, a place where everyone thought they knew each other. Familiar faces gave a false sense of security. We weren't rich, but we never went without. My life was routine. I worked at a mechanic's shop and spent my evenings at home, reading or watching television. I lived alone in a modest house I had inherited from my parents, who had passed away years earlier. That house, once a place of refuge, became the scene of my worst nightmare. The afternoon began with the sky darkening earlier than usual. Thunder rumbled, warning of an incoming storm. As I closed the shop and headed home, I felt a strange uneasiness I couldn't shake. I knew the storm would be bad. The air was heavy, pressing down on me. Driving through the empty streets, I couldn't quite place the source of my anxiety. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I arrived home just as the rain began to pour. I made myself dinner and turned it on the TV, hoping to distract myself from the storm. As the hours passed, the rain intensified, transforming the streets into rivers. Then, a loud bang interrupted my thoughts, coming from the back door. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously went to check. The back door was slightly ajar, a chilling sight. I had always been careful with the locks, especially on nights like this. I inspected the backyard but saw nothing unusual. Yet, the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. I locked the door, made sure the windows were secure, and returned to the living room, trying to calm myself. Around 10 p.m., a second bang, this time on the living room window, startled me. It was loud, as if something had struck the glass. I quickly turned off the TV and stood still, listening. The storm raged outside, but there was something else, something that didn't belong. Then the phone rang, making my heart race. I answered, hoping to hear a familiar voice, but the line was dead. Only static filled the silence. That's when I realized someone was playing with me. My mind raced with possibilities. A burglar, or maybe a group of teenagers. But the window knock and the phone call felt too calculated. I tried calling the police, but the line was dead. My only option was to stay alert and wait for the storm to pass. I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet for defense and turned on all the lights. I sat in the living room, trying to stay calm. But then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, from inside the house. Fear paralyzed me for a moment. I grabbed the flashlight and bat, moving cautiously toward the sound. It led me to the kitchen, where a window was slightly open. Wet footprints marked the floor, leading to the basement door, which was now wide open. I gathered my courage and went down the stairs, flashlight trembling in my hand. The basement seemed empty at first, but the smell, rust mixed with something else, was stronger now. That's when I saw it. Someone had written on the wall in red paint, "I'm watching you." Panic surged through me. I fled up the stairs, secured the basement door, and heard a low laugh, guttural and unsettling, coming from somewhere in the house. I tried to flee, but the front door was locked from the outside. Whoever was inside wasn't there to steal. They were playing with me. I hid in a closet, waiting. Minutes dragged by, each one worse than the last. Then everything went silent. The storm, too, seemed to pause. Suddenly, the closet door flew open, and there he was, a tall man with his face covered by a black mask. Before I could react, he pushed me to the floor. In a calm, contemptuous voice, he whispered, "I warned you." I somehow managed to strike him with the bat and ran to the kitchen. The only escape was through the window, which I barely managed to open. I jumped into the pouring rain and ran without looking back. I reached my neighbor's house, soaked and shaking. The police arrived shortly afterward. When we returned to my house, it was empty. No sign of the intruder. The message in the basement remained like some twisted joke. The intruder was never found. That night, I learned that terror doesn't need a mask to be real. It was a stormy night, a night when the rain seemed to drown out all other sounds. My name is Daniel, and I'll never forget the terror of that night. Javier's story. I heard footsteps. They didn't come from the street, but from inside the house. The sound was deliberate, slow, as if the person knew exactly where to step. I ran to the living room, searching for a place to hide. I found cover behind an overturned piece of furniture, trying to steady my breathing as the footsteps drew nearer. The figure of a man appeared in the doorway, tall, dressed in black, with a balaclava covering his face. He was carrying a knife in one hand and a small, heavy briefcase in the other. He calmly searched the room, moving the furniture as if looking for something. I stayed perfectly still, praying he wouldn't find me. Finally, he walked to the front door and disappeared into the rain. I waited a few moments before cautiously leaving my hiding place, ensuring the intruder was gone. My heart was pounding as I ran back to my house, soaked and terrified. I quickly called the police, stammering as I described what I had seen. I gave them my address and made sure all the doors and windows were securely locked. As I waited, I couldn't stop thinking about the Garcias. Why would anyone do something so horrible? What could they have done to deserve such a fate? When the police arrived, I shared everything I knew. They searched the Garcia home and confirmed what I feared. Both were dead, and the intruder had taken something valuable. What disturbed me most was what one of the officers said before leaving. This wasn't a typical robbery. This man knew exactly what he was looking for. In the following days, there was a whirlwind of questioning and speculation. The police discovered that the Garcias had been involved in something no one in the neighborhood could have imagined. Years ago, they had witnessed a crime and kept evidence in their home, believing it would never be found. But someone had discovered it, and that night, they paid the price. They never caught the man I saw in the house. We never learned what was in the briefcase he took, but every time it rains, I relive that night. The scent of blood mixing with the storm and the sound of those footsteps that continue to haunt me in my dreams. Some crimes change you forever. This was one of them. Rain can wash away footprints, but it can't wash away fear. And for me, that fear is a constant reminder of what it means to face the true face of evil. Louise's story. My name is Louise, and there are some memories that should never be kept. Yet, some stay with you, like splinters in your mind, refusing to leave. What happened that rainy night at the school where I worked is one of those memories, a fragment that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I had started my job as a janitor at the high school just 6 months earlier. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to get by, and the quiet nights working alone were a kind of refuge. My routine was simple: cleaning the classrooms after the students left, turning off the lights, and locking up before heading home. That night, the rain was relentless, slamming against the windows, the drops distorting the outside lights. The wind howled like a mournful cry. I liked the sound. It was calming in its own chaotic way. But that peace was short-lived. The school was deserted. The hallways, usually filled with chatter and laughter, were now dark and silent, save for the echo of my footsteps and the squeak of my mop. It was nearing midnight when I finished cleaning the classrooms on the first floor and began to head upstairs. That's when I heard a noise that shouldn't have been there. The unmistakable sound of a door slamming against its frame. Froze, listening. It came from the lab wing, an area usually locked after school hours. I put down my mop and walked toward the labs, flashlight in hand, shining it on the worn floor tiles. When I reached the lab, I found the door ajar. I pushed it open cautiously. The room was as it should be. The benches, the equipment, all in place. But the air felt different, heavier, as if something unseen was filling the space. I closed the door, making sure it latched properly, and turned to leave. But then I heard another noise, this time from the third floor. The third floor was rarely used. Some classrooms had been locked for years. I walked up the stairs, unease growing with each step. The lights flickered, and the sound of rain outside seemed louder, almost overwhelming. At the end of the hallway, I saw that one door was open. It was the door to classroom 307, which I had locked earlier that afternoon. I approached cautiously and shone my flashlight inside. The room was empty, but something was wrong. On one of the desks lay a knife, its large blade catching the light. Stepped back, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a student had left it there, perhaps as a joke, or forgotten it after an activity. But who forgets a knife like that? I didn't touch it. I closed the door firmly and locked it before heading down to the first floor. As I gathered my things to leave, I heard a sound. Footsteps. Clear, firm, coming from the second floor. Fear froze me for a moment. I grabbed a broomstick, my only weapon, and headed back up. When I reached the second floor, there was no one. I checked the classrooms one by one. Everything seemed in place, but the air was thick with an unsettling tension. Just as I turned to head back down, I saw him, a man standing by the window at the end of the hallway. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me. Instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. I took a few steps back before he started walking toward me, holding something in his hand, something that gleamed in the flickering hallway light. I turned and fled, running down the stairs as fast as I could. When I reached the main exit, I found the door locked. My key wasn't in my pocket. I looked up and saw him calmly descending the stairs, a deliberate step at a time. He wasn't there by accident. He was hunting me. I ran to the opposite wing of the building, searching for an escape, but all the doors were locked. The gym was my only option, a large, empty space rarely used. I locked myself inside, hiding behind one of the basketball hoop curtains, trying to steady my breath. The footsteps grew closer, slow but relentless. Then, I heard the door shake, followed by the sound of wood splintering. He was inside. I waited in the dark, too terrified to move. When he passed close to my hiding place, I could feel his presence, his breathing. Once he was gone, I waited a few minutes before sneaking out and running to the main office. I called the police, explaining what little I could through panicked gasps. When they arrived, the man was gone. They searched the building, but there was no trace of him. I never saw him again, but the terror I felt that night will stay with me forever. The knife in room 307 was missing, and the officers looked at me with a mix of skepticism and concern. Days later, I found out a man had been arrested in a nearby neighborhood. He was carrying a knife similar to the one I saw that night, and was linked to a series of crimes in the area. I never discovered what he was doing at the school, or why he targeted me. All I know is that every time I hear rain hitting the windows, I think back to that night, and I wonder how close he really was to catching me. Valentine's Day was always a strange occasion for me, maybe because I never really understood the romantic side of flowers, chocolates, and candlelit dinners, but that rainy night changed how I would view that day forever. Now, every February 14th, I can't help but reflect on what happened, on how I became a witness to something that should have stayed hidden. It all started with a downpour that turned the city into a maze of puddles and shadows. I spent the afternoon at a bar where I used to work, a modest place that was barely half full on a weeknight. But that night was different. It was livelier than usual. Couples filled the tables, some shy, others drunk with love. The red heart decorations and hanging lights seemed silly to me, but they attracted customers, and that was enough. At 10 p.m., my shift ended, and I went out the back alley to avoid the crowd. The rain was falling so hard that my jacket barely helped. As I walked toward my car, I heard a dull thud from an abandoned building at the end of the street. I didn't think much of it. Strange noises were common in that area, where homeless people and teenagers took shelter from the rain. But as I started the car, I saw something that made me stop. A figure was moving quickly toward the same building. A tall man wearing a dark coat and a hat that covered his face. He was carrying something that looked like a wrapped package or box. I would have continued driving, but when he opened the door to the building, I saw the blade of a knife sticking out from his waist. Curiosity got the better of me, and I left the car walking toward the building. It was a ruin, broken windows, graffiti on the walls, and a musty smell of mold. The only light came from occasional flashes of lightning that briefly lit up the hallways. I climbed a rusty metal staircase carefully, trying not to make noise. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't turn back. When I reached the second floor, I heard voices, two people arguing quietly. Though I couldn't make out their words, their tones were tense. I approached a half-open door and saw a faint glow of a flashlight. I froze when I looked inside. There was a woman sitting in a chair, her hands and feet bound with duct tape. A handkerchief covered her eyes, and her body trembled. In front of her, the man in the dark coat held a knife in one hand and a note in the other. Beside him, there was a makeshift table with wilted flowers and a cheap bottle of wine, a grotesque mockery of Valentine's Day. The man muttered something, but his words were drowned out by the rain and the pounding of my heart. Everything inside me screamed to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen between the horror of what I was seeing and the instinct to do something. Suddenly, another man entered the room, a stockier figure wearing a wet leather jacket. He dropped a bag onto the floor, making a loud thud. From where I hid, I saw that the bag contained more duct tape, ropes, and a bloody piece of cloth. The woman let out a moan, and my stomach churned. This wasn't a simple robbery or a random kidnapping. This was calculated, methodical. The man in the dark coat pointed to the bag, and then at the woman, as if giving instructions. The other man nodded and approached the victim. That's when I noticed something on his hand. A ring. It was identical to one my ex-girlfriend had worn years ago. It was a unique design, with leaves surrounding the center stone. We had bought it together at a local store. The memory distracted me so much that I didn't notice when the two men turned toward the door. Our eyes met for a split second, and then the burly man shouted something, and the man in the dark coat bolted toward the door. Finally, my instincts kicked in, and I ran. I slipped on the wet floor as I sprinted down the hall. The footsteps of my pursuers echoed behind me. I raced down the metal stairs, gripping the railing as my heart pounded in my chest. When I reached the alley, the rain hit my face so hard I could barely see. I frantically searched for my car keys, but couldn't find them. In a panic, I remembered I had left them in the ignition. I ran to the car, and just as I was getting inside, a hand slammed against the window. It was the man in the dark coat, knife raised. I quickly turned the key, and the engine roared to life just as he tried to open the door. I stepped on the gas and drove out of the alley, but I didn't get far. I parked at a gas station a few blocks away, shaking so much that I could barely hold the wheel. I called the police, giving them the address of the building and describing what I had seen. I stayed in the car, waiting for them to arrive. 20 minutes later, I saw patrol cars and heard sirens as they entered the building, flashlights in hand. The next day, the news reported that the body of a woman named Maria, 26, had been found in that same building. She had disappeared a few days earlier after leaving her job at a nearby store. The men weren't caught that night, but it was later discovered that they were part of a kidnapping and murder ring. Though the case was solved, the guilt still haunts me. I could have done more. I could have intervened sooner. But when I think back to that night, to the sound of the rain and the look in the man's eyes, I know I was lucky to escape. Valentine's Day is no longer a day of love for me. It's a reminder of how fragile life can be and how close I came to losing mine. At that point in my life, everything seemed meaningless. I had lost my job, my relationships were falling apart, and I was drowning in the consequences of bad decisions. That's when I met Victor. He had a deep gaze and a soft voice, and he seemed to understand my struggles. He never judged me or condemned me. He spoke as if all my pain was just part of a larger journey toward something better. One afternoon, while I was working at the repair shop, Victor invited me to a special meeting outside the city. He promised it would offer peace, redemption, and a way to heal my deepest wounds. Something inside me sparked a hope, and I decided to go. The rain began to fall as I left the city, and the road grew darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't just outside. It felt like something more sinister. When we arrived, the estate seemed out of time, like something from another era. In the middle of a small forest stood an old stone mansion. The door was open, inviting us in. Inside, the atmosphere was different. The members of the group greeted each other with warm smiles and hugs, and the room was dimly lit by candles. There was a calmness that contradicted the storm outside. The group leader, Ava, greeted us with a warm smile. Her voice was soothing, and she spoke of connection and transcendence. She said the group was about achieving awakening, freedom from ego and suffering. It sounded perfect for someone like me. At first, the meetings were simple: meditation, self-awareness exercises, and group chanting. Everything seemed so pure, so full of good intentions. The rain continued to beat on the roof, setting a steady rhythm that helped deepen my focus. But as time passed, something changed. The members, once calm and friendly, began to shift. There was a growing tension. Ava and the leaders spoke more about sacrifice, about leaving behind everything that connected us to the outside world, what they now described as corrupt and distracting. Those who voiced doubts were taken to one of the upper rooms to be purified. One night after a long day of ceremonies, Ava summoned us to the Great Hall. The storm outside was at its worst, and thunder rumbled ominously. With her usual calm demeanor, Ava told us we were ready for the final ritual. This was the final step to complete liberation. No one hesitated. No one objected. In my apathy, I just followed along. We were led to the basement, where the air was damp and the stone walls felt cold. The only light came from candles. The floor was covered in a red carpet, and in the center a hooded figure knelt, bound, seemingly in a trance. Ava explained that this was a necessary sacrifice, the last step toward achieving eternal peace and divinity. The hooded figure didn't resist. He just knelt motionless, waiting for what was to come. A member of the group, someone I had meditated with and laughed alongside, raised a ceremonial knife and plunged it into the hooded man's flesh. The sound wasn't a scream. It was a whisper of pain and despair that echoed through me. Blood soaked the carpet, and in that moment, I realized that I wasn't in a group of healers. I was in a cult, feeding off the suffering of others. Fear took over me. In a moment of clarity, I knew I had to escape. But before I could move, Victor grabbed my arm. His gaze was empty, his face a mask of indifference. He told me everything was part of the process. I had to be one with them to find peace, but everything inside me screamed to break free. I managed to escape his grip and ran through the hallways, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stone mansion. The storm grew louder and more oppressive with every step. Finally, I reached the front door. The rain still fell, but I didn't care. I ran without looking back, not knowing where I was going, just away from everything I had witnessed. I never saw the mansion again. When I returned to the city and reported everything, the police found no evidence. No one else had witnessed what I saw that night. Only I was left with the memories of the blood, of Victor's empty gaze, and of Ava's words echoing in my mind. Now, when the rain falls heavily, I wonder if it was ever real, or if it was just a dark dream. But every time I close my eyes, the storm rages on, and the image of that mansion hidden among the trees haunts me.